Chapter 933. Usually, Ning Fan relied on the power of his great five elements physique to devour immortal flames to recover his magic power without suffering any damage. Today, however, he was not going to devour an ordinary immortal flame but the flame of the adversity beast. Ning Fan did not know that the adversity beast was one of the four great sacred beasts of the ancient barbarian world. Its Tao of fire was invincible. Even the Vermilion Bird clan of the Purple Doe Immortal Domain had once lost to the adversity beast in terms of the Tao of fire. The adversity beast's flame was unparalleled in the world. This saying was passed down by word of mouth in the ancient barbarian world. The Vermilion Bird, Golden Crow, Tai Ho, Li Long, 9 animals, Sun Spirit, many ancient clans that established their Tao of fire were defeated by the adversity beast in terms of the Tao of fire. Many ancient great emperors who controlled the Tao of fire had tasted defeat in the hands of the adversity beast. The adversity beast might not be the strongest beings in the world, but in the domain of fire cultivators, it was undoubtedly the king. The adversity beast's flame was unparalleled in the world. Today, Ning Fan was going to fight against this unparalleled flame. The adversity beast's flame that was devoured by Ning Fan contained an enormous amount of life force. However, it also carried a fatal destructive power. The adversity beast's flame was too domineering. As soon as it entered Ning Fan's body, it immediately divided into 9 rays of fire light. They ran wildly along Ning Fan's meridians, trying to incinerate everything in front of them. The life force in his body burned even faster. Even his magic power was being dried up bit by bit. What was worse was that with the strength of Ning Fan's great 5 elements physique, he should be able to ignore the damage of a true immortal realm flame. However, under the burning of the adversity beast's flame, injuries kept appearing on his body. The flame had already exceeded Ning Fan's defense. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 4 breaths. After just 4 breaths, Ning Fan seemed to have reached his limit. The meridians in his body were being incinerated by the adversity beast's flame. They were like withered wheat stalks that would break at the slightest touch. The temperature of his body became terrifyingly high. His blood boiled like a thick soup while his skin and flesh began to burn. What was worse was that one of the 9 rays of fire light directly attacked Ning Fan's primordial spirit. What an arrogant flame! It actually wanted to incinerate Ning Fan's primordial spirit and kill him. The small hand of Ning Fan's primordial spirit held the memory-severing Tao sword to resist the attack of the flames. However, it was still burned quite a bit. Gradually, his injuries became more and more severe. 5 breaths, 6 breaths, 7 breaths. On the 10th breath, Ning Fan's face was as pale as a piece of paper. Just like what the strange eyeball had predicted, he wouldn't be able to last until the 11th breath without some special means. 10 breaths was his limit. 11 breaths. It would probably be difficult for him to hold on. 10 breaths have passed. It's about time for this brat to beg me to take action. The golden-eyed monster was secretly pleased with himself, looking forward to the scene of Ning Fan begging bitterly. If he asks me to help, I'll immediately activate the heaven-deceiving formation and help him avoid the 6th tribulation. Sigh, this old man is really too kind, always willing to help others. 11 breaths of time, why hasn't this kid opened his mouth to beg me? He can still hold on, but it's about time. He won't be able to last more than 12 breaths. Oh my, it's already been 13 breaths. This kid can still hold on. Not bad. Alright, I'll bet that you can hold on for another 2 breaths, but you definitely won't be able to last until the 16th breath. It's been 17 breaths. Don't tell me this kid has been burned to death at the bottom of the lake. But his breath is still there. He's not dead yet. 19 breaths, 22 breaths, 29 breaths, 44 breaths, 936 breaths. Wait for me to take a nap, then continue counting. 3,650 breaths, 7,922 breaths. Wait for me to take a nap, then continue counting. 11,472 breaths, 20,000 breaths, 30,000 breaths. 96,756 breaths. Fuck, it's been 3 days and 3 nights. How can this brat still hold on? Is he a monster? The fire of adversity beast here can even burn an immortal king to death, but he can actually hold on for 3 days and 3 nights in the sea of fire. 3 days later, the eyeball monster let out a roar, beating its chest and stamping its feet even though it didn't have a chest and feet. It had waited for 3 days, but Ning Fan didn't beg for help. It was really disappointing. It also surprised the eyeball monster a little. This descendant of the Lai Yuan sect seemed to have more backbone than what it had imagined. The eyeball monster muttered to itself. It spread out its spirit sense to explore the bottom of the lake. Every time it did so, it would see Ning Fan burning like a man on fire. At this moment, Ning Fan was sitting in the middle of the sea of fire. His entire body was burning. He had been in this state for 3 days and 3 nights. 10 breaths was his limit in the sea of fire. Even if he had cultivated the great 5 elements physique to the perfection realm, he still couldn't stay in the sea of fire for long because the fire of adversity beast was too strong. He originally couldn't hold on for more than 11 breaths, but the steel of sun and moon in the profound Yin world automatically protected its master at this moment. The steel of sun and moon had the ability to devour flames. The reason why Ning Fan could hold on for 3 days and 3 nights in the sea of fire was all because of the power of the steel of sun and moon. When Ning Fan just started cultivating, he had suppressed the flames of his enemies and defeated them all with the power of the steel of sun and moon. Later on, his cultivation base gradually improved and he even cultivated the minor 5 elements physique and the major 5 elements physique. Therefore, the enemies he encountered were rarely fire cultivators. Even if there were, he could deal with them calmly. Gradually, the steel of sun and moon was no longer used. Later on, when the yin-yang locket merged into one, another star steel appeared in the profound Yin world. Together with the steel of sun and moon, the 2 steels guarded the world. After the 2 steels guarded the world, Ning Fan could not take them out from the profound Yin world with his current cultivation base. Thus, he could not use the 2 innate magic treasures that he had. Hence, the steel of sun and moon and the star steel were sealed in the profound Yin world. This time, however, the steel of sun and moon was destined to show off its might once again. It was because the fire of adversity beast this time was too strong. Even with Ning Fan's cultivation base and the great 5 elements physique, he still could not win against it. This time, he had no choice but to rely on the power of the steel of sun and moon again. Even if he could not take it out from the profound Yin world, he could still use its power to slightly suppress the fire of adversity beast. In terms of fire power, the fire of adversity beast was unparalleled in the world. However, it did not mean that it had no natural enemies. The steel of sun and moon specialized in suppressing the 5 elements of the world. No matter how strong your fire of adversity beast is, I will still suppress it. Of course, if the power of the fire of adversity beast in front of him is too much stronger than the steel of sun and moon, the steel of sun and moon would not be able to do anything. The steel of sun and moon was an innate magic treasure. It had once killed countless people in the hands of ancient chaos and made it famous. However, it still had its limits. The steel of sun and moon could not suppress a flame that was close to the power of a saint. The scale of the sea of fire in front of him was only enough to threaten the life of an immortal king realm expert. It was far from the power of a saint. Thus, the steel of sun and moon could still suppress it. Rays of fiery light separated from the sea of fire and were absorbed into Ning Fan's body. They were refined into the profound Yin world and then absorbed into the steel of sun and moon. After all, he was using the steel of sun and moon in the profound Yin world. Thus, the speed at which the steel of sun and moon devoured the flames was not fast. Even so, Ning Fan's body would gain a large amount of life force every time he devoured some flames. Fire also had life force. It also had life and death. Everything in the world had their own life and death. It was not the life and death that was given to them by the people of the world. Instead, it was the life that they originally possessed. In the eyes of barbarians, the world was alive. Ning Fan sat there for 3 days and 3 nights. While devouring a large amount of fire life force to forcefully pass the sixth suffering, he was also thinking about these questions. This was the unique worldview of barbarians. It was completely different from the worldview of the cultivators in the 4 heavens and 9 worlds. After 3 days, Ning Fan had already passed more than half of the sixth suffering. The duration of the sixth suffering was slightly longer than what Ning Fan had imagined. The sea of fire around him was getting lesser and lesser. It meant that he was close to passing the sixth suffering. Gradually, 3 bloodlines appeared in his body. Little by little, each of them condensed into a drop of blood. If he passes the sixth suffering, they would become 3 drops of ancestral-level barbarian blood. The grade of Ning Fan's devil flame was also increasing rapidly without him noticing. Ever since he started cultivating, it was his first time devouring such a powerful flame. In the past, his devil flame had just reached the level of the first adoration true flame. The power of the first adoration true flame was comparable to a first nirvana post-celestial magic treasure. Normally, only early true crossing realm cultivators could cultivate it. Today, however, the grade of his devil flame continued to break through. Second adoration, third adoration, fourth adoration, in just 3 days, the grade of Ning Fan's devil flame had broken through to the 11th adoration level. Even late thought fragmentation realm fire cultivators would find it difficult to cultivate the 11th adoration true flame. Only a small number of peak thought fragmentation realm cultivators could cultivate it. Moreover, some immortal venerable realm fire cultivators could not even cultivate the 12th adoration level flame. Their flame remained at the 11th adoration level. The 11th adoration true flame, a magic treasure with power comparable to the 11th nirvana post-celestial magic treasure, was successfully cultivated by Ning Fan in just 3 days. At this moment, Ning Fan's devil flame already had a demonic black-red color. Gradually, it even had a trace of the characteristics of the fire of disaster beast. The flame began to be filled with densely packed flame runes. When the flame burned, the sound of wind and thunder could be heard. It was just like a replica of the fire of disaster beast. Even the flow of the Tao of fire was extremely similar. Ning Fan's devil flame had inherited the domineering power of the fire of disaster beast. It was probably much stronger than the ordinary 11th adoration true flame. It was a great harvest. Of course, there was also an even greater harvest, which was the ancestral blood. On the 4th day, Ning Fan had completely refined the surrounding sea of flames. The gigantic shadow of the disaster beast above the valley let out a reluctant roar and finally dispersed. The entire valley had turned into ruins. Only a pool of black lake water remained. He had completely passed the sixth suffering. Among 100 young barbarians, only 3 or 4 of them could pass the sixth suffering, and Ning Fan was one of them. After overcoming the sixth suffering, Ning Fan produced 3 droplets of the barbarian race's ancestral blood, which were devoured by the Jia blood in a domineering manner. Jia Shui's grade, from a 2-star, was slowly inching towards a 3-star grade, roughly a quarter of a 3-star grade. It was actually so difficult to break through to the 3-star realm. Ning Fan's eyes were even more moved. Even though Ning Fan did not break through to the 3rd-star true blood realm, his tribulation blood realm cultivation base had improved tremendously. The current Ning Fan could already be considered as an expert among the late thought fragmenting realm experts just by relying on the strength of his Jia blood. Among the late thought fragmenting realm experts, there were very few who could defeat him. Next, the 7th trial. Ning Fan's eyes turned slightly solemn. Since he was able to pass the 6th form, he would also like to try the 7th form. He was not willing to give up just like that. The 7th trial is about to descend. The fact that you were able to pass the 6th trial has truly surprised this old man. But the 7th trial isn't something you can pass with your current strength. Let this old man open the heaven-deceiving formation for you, advised the eyeball monster in a solemn tone. Out of 100 Shaoxi barbarians, at least 3 or 4 would survive the 6th trial. But the 7th trial was something that not even 1 in 1,000 Shaoxi barbarians could pass. The eyeball monster did not think that Ning Fan would be the 1 in 1,000 Shaoxi barbarians. In this world, As long as it hasn't happened yet, there's no way to determine the outcome. I still have to give it a try. Senior, don't be in a hurry to activate the formation. If things don't work out, this junior will ask senior for help. I won't joke around with my life. Ning Fan's eyes were resolute. This tribulation was a great opportunity. If he missed it, it would be hard for him to find another opportunity to improve his cultivation base. Others would need hundreds or even tens of millions of years to cultivate a drop of ancestral blood. As for him, he only needed to endure the first trial and he would be able to cultivate a few drops of ancestral blood. This was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity. How could he miss it? Fine. You can try if you want. Not to mention the 7th trial, I will even give you the chance to go through the 8th and 9th trial as long as you are willing to. You're a young man after all. If you don't bump into a wall, you won't turn back. It's good to bump into it a few more times. Hee hee. You will naturally come to this old man for help when your head is bleeding. The eyeball monster thought in a good mood. Rumble, suddenly, the sound of galloping horses and troops could be heard from the sky. Among the red clouds that covered the sky, the shadows of ancient chariots kept appearing. These chariots were pulled by giant dragons. Countless shadows of barbarian cultivators were flying around the chariots. The number of chariots was like the clouds in the sky. The number of cultivators was endless. Behind the countless barbarian cultivators and chariots stood a giant that was taller than the sky. There were 7 giant skulls hanging on his neck. His bronze-colored muscles were filled with the power to destroy heaven and earth. The 7th tribulation had arrived. I need to resist the fire of disaster beast for the 6th trial. Could it be that I have to resist the thousands of chariots and barbarian cultivators for the 7th trial? Ning Fan pondered in his mind. Suddenly, his eyes turned cold. He saw the giant lifting his right hand casually. It was obviously an extremely casual movement, but the trajectory of his fist bones easily cut through heaven and earth, causing heaven and earth to fall into complete darkness at this moment, as if everything was going to be annihilated in this darkness. Without any warning, the life force in Ning Fan's body began to be annihilated in this endless darkness. Then, even his physical body and primordial spirit showed signs of being annihilated. I am the 7th barbarian god Ta Gu, the shadow of the mountains and seas left behind by the ancient times. The giant said with a blank expression. With my bones as the mountain, with my blood as the sea, with my palm as the Tao, with my Tao as the flow, the giant chanted the ancient words with a blank expression. He raised his right hand and clenched his fist. Then, he casually grabbed at the lake below him. The grab seemed to be very casual and silent. However, in the blink of an eye, the entire heaven and earth turned into a black river. Everything in front of him disappeared. Ning Fan could not see the eyeball monster, the ruins of the valley, the lake, the thousands of chariots and barbarian cultivators. He could only see himself standing on the long black river and the ancient giant standing proudly in the night sky. His body kept sinking into the long river. His Tao seemed like it was going to be completely melted in this long river. Not only the life force in his body, even his cultivation base, his Tao and his will were sinking into this long river. There was no way to resist this long black river. He could only sink and fall. Even an immortal king would die and an immortal emperor would not be able to resist it. This young man is really lucky. He actually encountered the shadow of the mountains and seas of the 7th barbarian god in his 7th trial. It's rare for an ordinary young priest to encounter the barbarian god's palm tribulation. I really don't know if he's lucky or unlucky. His 7th trial is even harder to overcome than ordinary people. 3 breaths. If he speaks within 3 breaths, I will definitely save him, the eyeball monster said with a solemn expression. Barbarian God was the title given to the highest ruler of the ancient barbarian world. There would only be one barbarian god in each generation. The barbarian god might not necessarily be the strongest of the barbarian race, but his authority was monstrous. Of course, this did not mean that the barbarian god was not powerful. At least, the seventh barbarian god Ta-gu was not a weakling. Although he was not a saint when he was alive, he was almost invincible among the second step. Ta-gu's most powerful divine ability was called Dao as the flow of oblivion. When he was at his peak, he used this ability to kill many immortal emperors. Immortal emperors were difficult to kill because their primordial spirits were protected by their emperor Qi. However, this technique was powerful enough to kill immortal emperors. What Ning Fan needed to face now was that Dao as the flow of oblivion technique. Sinking. He kept sinking. After just one breath, Ning Fan felt that he had sunk more than 1,000 zhang into the Black River. After he stepped onto the path of cultivation, he was already able to control his embryonic breath. However, this was the first time he felt like he was suffocating when he sank into this river. His life force was dissolving rapidly in this river. By the second breath, he had already lost more than half of his life force. By the third breath, the life force in his body was almost depleted. He was not far from death. His body was unprecedentedly weak. It was as if all of his magic power had melted into this river and he could not exert any strength at all. Gradually, he stopped sinking. Instead, he found a foothold in the river. The place where he was standing was a stone bridge. It was the true bridge of Dao execution that he had personally created. That true bridge was crumbling bit by bit in this river. If the true bridge collapses, his Dao will be destroyed and he will die. Memories of the past kept appearing in front of his eyes. There was the snow in 7 Apricot City, the rain in Yu Country, the blood of the cultivators in the Endless Sea. All of his memories showed signs of dissipating at this moment. They became more and more blurry, as if they were going to be buried in this river. This technique was called Dao as the flow of oblivion. This technique could erase one's cultivation, erase one's life, and even more so erase one's memories, erase everything the enemy left in this world. It could make everything that couldn't be destroyed disappear like the flow of oblivion and be buried in the river forever. Ning Fan's memories became more and more blurry. His memories seemed to be emptied by some kind of force. Gradually, he forgot his parents' voice and appearance. He forgot the chrysanthemum-like smile of the old monster. He forgot the snow in 7 Apricot City. Gradually, he couldn't even remember the appearance of Jihe. Who is Jihe? Where is 7 Apricot City? Who am I? It's been 3 breaths. If I don't act now, this kid will really be trapped in the flow of oblivion technique to death. How could this kid break this technique that could even trap an immortal emperor? What cultivation base does he have? It's a pity. It seems like he can't make any sound to ask for my help anymore. I can only take the initiative to save him. It's a loss. How could it not be a loss when he lost a chance to make the paralyzed face beg for mercy? The eyeball muttered discontentedly. Just as he was about to activate the heaven-deceiving formation, his eyes suddenly flashed with surprise. A trace of light suddenly appeared in the darkness that shrouded heaven and earth. It was like a bright crack that was forcefully torn apart from the darkness. That light only appeared for a moment and was quickly devoured by the darkness. However, the eyeball still couldn't conceal the shock on his face. Gradually, more and more light began to tear apart the darkness, but it was quickly devoured by the darkness. This kid actually didn't completely lose his consciousness in the flow of oblivion technique. He can still resist this technique. The eyeball hesitated. He was hesitating whether he should activate the heaven-deceiving formation immediately or give Ning Fan a chance to break the 7th variation. At this moment, Ning Fan's voice suddenly resounded in the endless darkness. It carried a sense of determination. I don't care who you are. But please don't disturb me. This river has taken away my memory. Now, I want to take it back. Ning Fan actually stopped the eyeball monster from activating the formation. At this moment, he was deep in the long river, standing on the true bridge that was on the verge of collapse. Without his memory, he forgot that he was going through the 7th variation. His expression was as cold as ice that would not melt for 3 winters. The ghost face had already automatically retracted, revealing a young face. That face was reflected in the pitch-black river, looking at himself blankly. Then, the water rippled and the reflection disappeared. I've lost part of my memory. However, I remember that this is my true bridge. Broken scenes appeared in front of his eyes. In those scenes, countless female cultivators were humiliating him. There was only a silly girl who ran to him and gave him a bun and a jade locket. That woman looks familiar. I think I know her. However, I'm unable to recall who she is. More scenes appeared in front of his eyes. Ning Fan's expression became colder and colder. He couldn't remember that he was going through the 7th variation. However, he would not allow the water of this long river to take away his memory. He wanted to take it back. No one was allowed to take away his memory, no matter who it was. On the 4th breath, the true bridge beneath Ning Fan's feet kept emitting cracking sounds. His true bridge was on the verge of collapsing. The eyeball hesitated like never before. It was already the 4th breath. Something bad was really going to happen to Ning Fan in the 7th variation. He must save Ning Fan. Ning Fan must not die. If he dies, who will help him kill Inmo? However, Ning Fan also said not to disturb him. Ning Fan had already lost his memory and his mind was not clear. He was probably talking nonsense. Who cares about the consequences? Let's save that stinking brat first. Just as he was about to activate the heaven-deceiving formation, the darkness of the night began to collapse. Dong dong. Dong dong. Ning Fan acted as if he did not see the true bridge beneath his feet collapsing. He had forgotten many things, but he still remembered the mountain and sea incantation. He had forgotten that this was his 7th variation. However, he could feel the life force in his body fading rapidly. He raised his hand and grabbed at the river. Large amounts of the river's life force were forcibly absorbed into his body. Resistance is useless. Above the long river, Ta Gu's shadow silently watched everything that was happening below. He knew that Ning Fan was resisting his oblivion current technique. However, he did not think that Ning Fan could resist it. Since ancient times, many immortal emperors had died under this technique. However, what surprised Ta Gu was that Ning Fan's true bridge had actually lasted for 4 breaths in the river without collapsing, even though he was just at the crossing truth realm. If he is an ordinary crossing truth realm cultivator, he would probably be turned into ashes as soon as he enters this river. This young man's true bridge seems to be somewhat extraordinary. Oh, so what this young man cultivates is Tao persistence. So what if he is a Tao steward? It's not like this river has never killed a Tao steward before. Even though Tao persistence cultivators are persistent and can survive in this river for a longer period of time, that's all. This young man won't be able to survive the 7th variation. The 5th breath. An undercurrent suddenly formed in the river. It rushed towards the true bridge beneath Ning Fan's feet, trying to destroy it. Ning Fan flicked his sleeve and the separation and reunion sword appeared in his hand. He slashed at the undercurrent in front of him, splitting it into 2. He managed to temporarily protect the true bridge. However, the moment the separation and reunion sword collided with the undercurrent, it seemed to have been melted by it. This sword was actually destroyed by the undercurrent in just a single blow. Ning Fan did not feel any heartache after destroying the separation and reunion sword. What he felt heartache for was the tiny sword spirit in his sword pouch. It was such a good sword, but it was destroyed just like that. The few little girls were chattering among themselves as if they were talking about something. However, all of their words were drowned by the river water. Ning Fan could not hear them clearly. Ning Fan just glanced at the broken sword and his eyes became even colder. It doesn't matter if the sword is destroyed. However, I must take back my memories. Bang! Ning Fan uttered a single word. He directly took out the broken separation and reunion sword and formed a hand seal. At the next moment, the dignified 12 Nirvana grade separation and reunion sword was directly detonated by Ning Fan mercilessly. The shockwave from the explosion of the magic treasure immediately blasted a hole in the bottom of the river. It's not enough. A mere 12 Nirvana grade magic treasure won't be able to break this technique. Gu shook his head disapprovingly. At the next moment, his expression changed for the first time. At the bottom of the river, Ning Fan moved at lightning speed. He took out his magic treasures and detonated them mercilessly. The Demon Essence Ruler, the 7-star lamp and the blue burning fan were detonated by Ning Fan without any hesitation. Ning Fan took out more magic treasures from his storage pouch and detonated them one by one. Many of the magic treasures were stained with blood. They were the treasures that Ning Fan obtained by killing others. The number of magic treasures was too large. They were the wealth that Ning Fan had accumulated by killing countless people along the way. Even Gu's expression changed slightly. Even though the young man in front of him did not have a high cultivation base, the number of people he killed was quite shocking. However, it was still not enough. Gu shook his head slightly. Ning Fan, on the other hand, revealed a satisfied look. Green light flashed in his eyes. His cultivation base might not be as good as the 7th barbarian god Gu, but his heavenly being vision was definitely incomparable to Gu when he was still alive. That was the vision of a second heavenly being realm expert. Even Gu had not broken through to the second heavenly being realm. Therefore, in Ning Fan's eyes, there were 3 weak spots in the river. He could see it but Gu could not. After he detonated countless magic treasures, the entire river began to become unstable. He could see it but Gu could not as well. He did not hope to break this technique. All he wanted was for it to loosen up for a moment. My cultivation base is not as good as yours, but I will not allow you to take away my memories. No matter who you are, since you have taken away my memories, you must return them to me. Ning Fan suddenly leaped up from the true bridge. Once again, the broken scenes of the all-pleasure sect appeared in front of his eyes. He could not remember who that young lady was. All he knew was that he must take back his memories at this moment. On the 6th breath, when the river became unstable, Ning Fan dashed towards the top of the river like an arrow that left the bow. Previously, he could not even move a single step in the river. Now, however, he could move. Gu was quite surprised. He could not imagine that a mere junior like Du Jin could actually cause a slight flaw in his technique. Just as he was about to make up for it, Ning Fan had already dashed out of the Black River. He turned into a ray of golden light and dashed towards Gu's shadow above the Black River. Give me back my memories. At this moment, the memory-severing sword light pierced into Gu's shadow. Memories immediately flooded into Ning Fan's mind like tidal waves. As for Gu, his expression was unprecedentedly ugly. Along with Ning Fan's own memories, there were also other memories mixed together and flowed into Ning Fan's mind. Chapter 934. He remembered it now. His lost memories were like a river that had dried up for a long time that was gradually filled with water. It was not the water of others but the water that he had lost. These were his memories. They were unique and irreplaceable. Shiha's voice and face gradually became clearer. The scenes of his memories also became clearer. Ning Fan smiled bitterly. He actually forgot so many things while he was in the 7th trial. He even almost died there. The 7th trial was really scary. Moreover, he actually detonated most of his magical treasures when he lost his memories. It was really a waste. So be it. No matter what, he managed to get his memories back. What surprised Ning Fan was that not only did he manage to get his memories back, but there were also other people's memories mixed with them and flowed into his mind. I am Gu. This is the 4th grade divine ability of the barbarian race, Great Flash Incantation, I am Gu. This is the 5th grade divine ability of the barbarian race, Dark Dog Technique. 5th grade divine ability, Dutian Style. 6th grade divine ability, Cloud Light 3 Bodies Technique. When Ning Fan pierced Gu's giant shadow with his sword, not only did he get his memories back, but he also took away part of Gu's memories. It turned out that this giant shadow was the shadow of the 7th barbarian god Gu. All of those memories were related to the barbarian race's divine abilities without exception. With just a single strike, Ning Fan's mind had 4 types of cultivation methods of the barbarian race's divine abilities. However, these 4 divine abilities did not seem to be profound and were not very useful. Nevertheless, his actions had really infuriated Ta Gu. Rage. What kind of rage was that? The dignified 7th barbarian god actually had some of his memories taken away by a barbarian junior, who was going through the 7th trial. What kind of humiliation was that? You barbarian junior, how dare you kill a god and seize his memories? I have to say that you are very bold. Ta Gu's face was terrifyingly gloomy. Since ancient times, there had never been a barbarian junior who dared to attack the barbarian god when he was going through the 7th trial. Because they did not dare to. The barbarian god was the god of barbarian cultivators. Any barbarian cultivator who attacked the barbarian god would be hunted down by all the other barbarian cultivators in the world. Firstly, Ta Gu did not expect Ning Fan to be able to get out of the river. Secondly, he did not expect Ning Fan to have the guts to stab him with his sword. Due to his carelessness, Ning Fan succeeded in thrusting his sword into his chest. The god of barbarians was assassinated by a junior, Du Zhen. How embarrassing. If today's events were to spread, this young man would no longer have a place in the ancient barbarian world. Even the barbarian tribe behind him would face the calamity of extinction. Stabbing the god of berserkers because of this was a heinous crime among the berserkers. Ta Gu only knew that Ning Fan was the barbarian prince of a tribe in the ancient barbarian world. However, he did not know that Ning Fan was not a barbarian at all. Ning Fan was not a barbarian. He did not know how serious of a crime it was to stab a barbarian god. All he knew was that the memory that he had lost was extremely important and he had to get it back no matter what. Even if he knew, he would still stab without hesitation. He was not a barbarian cultivator, nor was he in the ancient barbarian world. He was not afraid of being hunted down by countless cultivators in the ancient barbarian world. No matter how powerful those barbarian cultivators were, could they run all the way to the 4 heavens and 9 worlds to kill him? However, that oblivion current technique was indeed powerful. Once one is trapped in the river, even an immortal emperor would find it difficult to escape. Their Tao attainments and memories would all turn into the river water. In the end, they would not be able to escape death. Fortunately, Ning Fan had the eyesight of a 2nd-level heaven being realm expert. He was able to see through some of the weaknesses of Ta Gu's ability. After detonating countless magic treasures, the magic technique was finally unstable for a moment. Then, he seized the opportunity to escape from the bottom of the river and stabbed Ta Gu with his sword. If he falls into the river again, Ning Fan did not know if he would still be so lucky to be able to escape again. However, since he managed to escape, he had to collect some interest from this 7th god of barbarians. Ning Fan's eyes turned even colder. The Tao sword that was pierced into the body of Ta Gu's gigantic shadow suddenly slashed horizontally. It actually cut Ta Gu's gigantic shadow into 2. This gigantic shadow was extremely fragile. It was not as difficult to deal with as the oblivion current technique. After cutting Ta Gu's gigantic shadow with a single slash, Ning Fan's mind once again gained a lot of memories. 6th grade ability, Ghost Running Technique. 7th grade ability, 5 Directions 4 Earths Technique. 7th grade ability, Scorching Fire Curse. 8th grade ability, 4 Directions Destruction Curse. 9th grade ability, Oblivion Current Technique. More and more abilities kept surging into Ning Fan's mind. After counting them carefully, there were actually more than 100 of them. Among them was even the Oblivion Current technique that Ta Gu was using. In the barbarian race, a 7th grade ability was equivalent to the Void Shedding technique while an 8th grade ability was equivalent to the Thought Breaking technique. The Oblivion Current technique was a 9th grade ability. Moreover, it was not an ordinary 9th grade ability. In the 4 heavens and 9 worlds, it was definitely an immortal emperor's technique that was hard to come by. After obtaining the additional memories of the Oblivion Current technique, Ning Fan's eyes suddenly turned strange when he looked at the water of the river again. With this part of the memories, Ning Fan directly knew all the weaknesses of the Oblivion Current technique. If he is trapped in the river again, he even has the confidence to break this technique head-on. I just got a huge chunk of memories for free, you've got some guts. However, it's useless. The gigantic shadow of Ta Gu that was cut into two fused back into one. His expression became even gloomier. He raised his giant hand and pressed it down on Ning Fan. He did not expect that Ning Fan would have the guts to commit the second crime after committing the first one by slashing himself with his sword. As he pressed down, heaven and earth immediately reversed. Ning Fan, who had already escaped from the river, swayed and fell to the bottom of the river once again, sinking bit by bit. I don't care how you escaped from this river just now. But this time, you won't have the chance to escape anymore. Ta Gu pointed his finger at the river. Immediately, countless runes appeared on the surface of the river. Like a layer of transparent glass, it completely sealed off the river surface. He believed that Ning Fan, who fell to the bottom of the river once again, would certainly not be able to break this layer of seal and escape. He actually dared to assassinate the barbarian god. Ha! What a courageous junior. However, it's useless. He will still die in this river in the end. Ta Gu gently closed his eyes, feeling that it was beneath him to continue watching. When he fell to the bottom of the river again, Ning Fan's eyes were extremely calm. He directly sat down cross-legged at the bottom of the river and performed a mysterious hand seal with both of his hands. This time, he was not in a hurry to escape. He had obtained the cultivation method of the Oblivion Current technique. Among them, there was a way to deal with the technique. The river water of the Oblivion Current technique possessed terrifying power. Even an immortal emperor would be wary of this technique. However, after Ning Fan performed tens of hand seals, the river water within 3 zhang of him strangely retreated, forming a vacuum zone. Any river water that tried to get close to Ning Fan would be repelled by a gentle force. Gradually, some of the river water began to be controlled by Ning Fan. It listened to his orders and moved to the east or west with just a single thought from him. Before he obtained the cultivation method of the Oblivion Current technique, Ning Fan was still unable to see anything special about it. But now, when he looked at the Black River, he found it to be different. How was this a river water? It was clearly the black runes that were condensed from the power of the barbaric flash. They flowed with each other to form the river. What Ning Fan was gradually controlling was not the flowing water in the river but the black runes. It was these runes that formed the flowing water. As for those hand seals, they were the hand seals used to control the runes. The number of runes in the entire river exceeded hundreds of millions. With Ning Fan's cultivation base, he could not control too many of them. He could only control the runes that were within 3 zhang of him. Even so, it was already enough for him to protect himself in the river and prevent the river water from getting close to him. This is the finger technique of the Oblivion Flow technique. Ta Gu's eyes darkened. He only knew that Ning Fan had taken away a lot of his memories. However, he did not know that the cultivation method of the Oblivion Current technique was also included among the memories that were taken away. In that case, it would not be easy to kill Ning Fan with the Oblivion Current technique. Fortunately, he had already set up a seal above the river. Even though this technique could not kill him, it was still very easy for it to trap him. However, how long could they trap Ning Fan for? Hatred burned in Ta Gu's heart. He was only the shadow of the mountain and sea left behind by the 7th god of berserkers. This shadow of the mountain and sea could only use one divine ability, the Oblivion Flow art. Since he could not use his other abilities, it was impossible for him to kill Ning Fan. He was a barbarian god, but he could not kill a junior like Du Zhen. This fact made him extremely sullen. Besides, the power of his mountain sea shadow was limited. It could only trap Ning Fan for 7 days at most. If Ning Fan was still alive after 7 days, the power of the shadow of the mountain and sea would be exhausted. At that time, the long river would disappear and Ning Fan would be considered to have passed the 7th stage. Since the ancient times, how many young priest barbarians had passed the 7th trial? There was not even one in 1,000 of them. Ta Gu was unwilling to let this junior who offended him pass the 7th trial. However, he could not stop him from passing the tribulation successfully. Therefore, he felt very sullen. Something that made him even angrier was gradually happening. Ning Fan calmly sat at the bottom of the long river and began to practice the Oblivion Flow art at a leisurely pace. This was simply looking down on his authority as the 7th god of berserkers. He, the dignified 7th god of berserkers, could not even kill a junior like Dujin even if he wanted to. However, this junior actually dared to practice the divine ability that made him famous in front of him. How audacious of him! Ta Gu smiled coldly. This Oblivion Flow art was not that easy to practice. Speaking of which, this technique was not a divine ability of the barbarian race. Instead, it was a divine ability of the tribulation blood that he obtained from an expert of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit. The barbarian race was the servants of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit. When it was his turn to become the barbarian god, the ancient barbarian world had already fallen. As the barbarian god of this generation, his life was rather sullen. Normally, he would not dare to provoke the powerful Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit at all. Even if he encountered the weak Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit, he would still treat them politely and not dare to offend them. In the barbarian world, he was the god of tens of thousands of races with a high status. However, in front of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit, he was just a servant of a destroyed country. Fortunately, Ta Gu was a tactful person. He had befriended many of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirits and obtained some divine abilities of the Tribulation blood from them. The bloodline of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit shared some similarities with the bloodline of the barbarian race. However, for some unknown reason, the bloodline of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit was naturally superior to that of the barbarian race. The Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit could practice the divine abilities of the barbarian race, but the barbarians could not use the divine abilities of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit. If a barbarian tried to learn the divine abilities of the barbarian race by force, there would only be one outcome: chi deviation, and their bloodline would be ignited. That Oblivion Flow art was a genuine divine ability of the tribulation blood. Logically speaking, it was impossible for Ta Gu to learn it. Fortunately, he had a lot of friends. Many of them even helped him plant a tribulation spirit blood talisman in his body. In this way, he could barely display the Oblivion Flow art. He even used this technique to look down on the entire ancient barbarian world. Unfortunately, he was not the real Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit after all. Even if he managed to display the Oblivion Flow art, there were still many flaws and he could not execute it perfectly. This was also the reason why Ning Fan was able to get out of the long river by luck. If it was the real Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit who displayed this technique, it would be hard to say whether Ning Fan could escape or not. At this moment, Ta Gu was secretly sneering. He was sneering because Ning Fan was courting his own death by cultivating the tribulation blood divine ability with the identity of a barbarian. What he did not know was that Ning Fan was not a barbarian at all. What he possessed was exactly the bloodline of the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit. In Ta Gu's memories, there are a total of 132 types of divine abilities. The Oblivion Flow art is the only divine ability of the tribulation blood. Moreover, this technique is the only one that has reached the 9th grade. Ning Fan was not interested in any of the other divine abilities. Only this Oblivion Flow art was of great use to him. Currently, Ning Fan possessed 4 types of divine, demon, devil, and tribulation power at the same time. Among them, the power of the tribulation blood was the strongest. Unfortunately, Ning Fan still did not know any of the divine abilities that only belonged to the tribulation spirit race. Ning Fan could also use the power of the tribulation blood to display the divine abilities of other races. However, by doing so, the destructive power of the divine abilities would be greatly reduced. Without a suitable divine ability, the tribulation blood would not be able to display 100% of its combat power. Ning Fan had actually obtained the cultivation method of the Oblivion Flow art from Ta Gu's memories. If he can learn this technique, his combat power would increase significantly when he fights as a tribulation spirit in the future. The threshold to cultivate the Oblivion Flow art was not high. Even a life immortal realm expert could cultivate it. However, in order to master this technique, one must have a cultivation base above the Immortal Emperor realm. The destructive power of this technique was related to the number of runes one could cultivate. Those runes were called annihilation runes. The more runes one had, the stronger this technique would be. The first rune was the most difficult to cultivate. After that, there would be a shortcut for him. Ning Fan was not in a hurry. Since he was trapped at the bottom of the long river once again, he would make that barbarian god Ta Gu, who was high and mighty, pay the price. Ta Gu predicted that Ning Fan would not be able to cultivate the Oblivion Current technique. However, Ning Fan was secretly plotting against Ta Gu. One day and one night passed. Ning Fan still had not passed through the 7th stage, but he did not die either. The eyeball monster outside was anxious, but most of it was shocked. That brat actually managed to last for so long in the 7th God of Berserkers Dowa raid in Oblivion. Could it be that he really has a chance to get through the 7th test? It was hard to find one in 1,000 young barbarian priests who could overcome the 7th stage. This stinking brat is too heaven-defying. Legend has it that after passing through the 7th stage, apart from being able to cultivate the ancestral realm barbarian blood, one would also be rewarded by the barbarian god. It was the barbarian god Ta Gu who gave this brat the palm tribulation. If this brat passes through the 7th stage, I wonder what Ta Gu would reward him with. The strange eyeball muttered to itself. It actually had some confidence in Ning Fan passing through the 7th stage. Even though he had seen countless people, this was the first time he began to pay attention to Ning Fan. It was not Ning Fan's life-slaying sword technique but Ning Fan himself. A person who had a chance of crossing the 7th trial was worthy of his attention. Time passed bit by bit. The 2nd day passed quickly. Ning Fan sat cross-legged at the bottom of the long river. His hands formed hand seals and a black rune with a hint of scarlet appeared in front of him bit by bit. Seeing that Ning Fan was about to cultivate the first annihilation rune, Ta Gu was not angry. Instead, he laughed. From his point of view, Ning Fan was just seeking his own death. Cultivating the tribulation blood divine ability with the identity of a barbarian. He was just a mere shadow of a mountain and sea. It was impossible for him to kill Ning Fan. However, if he could witness Ning Fan's barbaric blood burning to death, it wouldn't be a bad idea. On the 3rd day, Ning Fan finally cultivated the first annihilation rune. Ta Gu's sneer became even colder. He was waiting for the scene of Ning Fan's barbaric blood burning to death. However, no matter how he waited, Ning Fan still did not die. There was only a hint of fatigue on his face. However, there was no other unusual expression on his face. How is this possible? As a barbarian who cultivates the tribulation spirit divine ability, he actually did not die from the burning of his blood. Ta Gu's eyes darkened. He felt that there was something fishy about this matter. Could it be that this young man is extremely lucky and also has a friend or even a senior of the Taitsung tribulation spirit who planted the tribulation spirit blood talisman in his body with the help of others? There was another point that Ta Gu could not figure out. The annihilation rune that Ning Fan cultivated seemed to be purer and more powerful than the rune that he cultivated himself. He condensed the rune using the power of the barbaric flash while Ning Fan did not seem to be using the power of the barbaric flash. Gradually, Ta Gu saw through some clues. Even though he was unwilling to believe it, he had no choice but to believe it. The reason why Ning Fan's rune was purer than his was because Ning Fan himself was a Taitsung tribulation spirit. Therefore, Ning Fan was more suitable to cultivate the Oblivion Current technique than him. This young man is actually a Taitsung tribulation spirit. No wonder he dared to stab me with his sword. With the identity of a tribulation spirit, which barbarian cultivator would dare to hunt him down? Ta Gu sighed softly and revealed a bitter smile. Barbarians were the slaves of tribulation spirits. No matter how high their cultivation base was, they were still slaves. No matter how high Ning Fan's cultivation base was, as long as he had the identity of a tribulation spirit, Ta Gu would not dare to provoke him easily. Fortunately, Ta Gu was already dead. What was left behind was just the shadow of a mountain and sea. Since he had offended the Taitsung tribulation spirit, he was not afraid of revenge. Since he was already dead, why would he still be afraid of the Taitsung tribulation spirit? If he had the means to kill Ning Fan, he would still do so. Unfortunately, his shadow of a mountain and sea could not kill Ning Fan. It's really a pity. I didn't dare to attack the Taitsung tribulation spirit when I was alive. If I can kill a Taitsung tribulation spirit after I die, it would also be a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, I can't kill him. Ta Gu sighed coldly. He did not consider whether he would bring disaster to the ancient barbarian world after he kills the tribulation spirit. He did not have the moral integrity of a barbarian god. He was selfish by nature. Only such a person could continue to serve the ancient barbarian world as a slave after the ancient barbarian world had fallen. Those with true integrity would only die in battle for the sake of protecting their world. Why would they be willing to be someone's slave? After Ning Fan cultivated the first annihilation rune, he did not continue to cultivate the second rune. Instead, he stood up from the bottom of the river. A single annihilation rune did not have much power at all. Only when there were more than 10,000 of them would it have some power. However, it was just a little. In order to make the Oblivion Current technique reach the power of Du Zhen, he would need at least 100,000 runes. The power of Renounce Void would need 1 million runes. The power of Sense Fragment would need 10 million runes. The power of Eternal Ancient Realm would need up to 100 million runes or even more. Ning Fan could only cultivate 1 rune in 3 days. In a year, he could only cultivate 100 runes. In 10,000 years, he could only cultivate 1 million runes. In order to make the Oblivion Current technique possess the power of an ancient immortal venerable, he would need to cultivate this technique for at least 1 million years or even longer. Ordinary methods could not allow him to cultivate the annihilation runes quickly. However, there were also shortcuts that he could take. If he encounters an expert who also cultivates the Oblivion Current technique, he could use his own runes to devour his opponent's runes and quickly condense new runes. The long river that trapped Ning Fan was formed by hundreds of millions of runes. Previously, Ta Gu had used this long river to trap Ning Fan and kill him. Today, it was Ning Fan's turn to borrow Ta Gu's long river of annihilation to cultivate his runes. Devour. Ning Fan pointed his finger forward. The annihilation rune that he had just cultivated immediately flew forward and began to devour the countless runes in the long river. According to the introduction of the Oblivion Current technique, one would need to devour tens of runes in order to cultivate one rune that belonged to them. There were quite a number of runes in Ta Gu's long river. It was enough for Ning Fan to cultivate for a while. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Ning Fan's 1 rune turned into 2. After the time it takes for another incense stick to burn, the 2 runes turned into 4. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the 4 runes turned into 8. It was a geometric growth. The further he cultivated, the faster the speed of increase. Time passed by slowly. The number of runes in Ning Fan's body kept increasing. 1 hour later, the number of runes had already exceeded 4,000. Another hour later, the number of runes in his body had reached 11 million. At this moment, the entire long river had already disappeared. It was completely devoured by Ning Fan's runes. 11 million annihilation runes were enough to make the Oblivion Current technique achieve the power of the sense-breaking technique. Despicable brat. Ta Gu stared at the scene in front of him with bloodshot eyes. Ning Fan was really audacious. He actually easily devoured all the runes that he had cultivated for countless years. If he was still alive and if he appeared beside Ning Fan with his true body, it would be impossible for Ning Fan to easily devour the annihilation runes that he had cultivated for so many years. However, he was already dead after all. Moreover, the runes that he cultivated were not perfect. They were not as pure as Ning Fan's runes. He was powerless to stop Ning Fan from devouring his runes. All he could do was watch Ning Fan ruin his runes. How many years had he cultivated painstakingly when he was alive just to cultivate these billions of annihilation runes? He must have used tens of millions of years. This thief sure has guts. He actually used less than 2 hours to completely destroy the runes that he had cultivated for tens of millions of years. Despicable. Despicable. If it wasn't because I have been dead for so many years, I would certainly grind your bones into ashes to vent the hatred in my heart. Ta Gu roared at the sky, wishing that he could chop Ning Fan into pieces and feed him to the dogs. Just you wait. Just you wait. Even though I am dead, I still have many friends who have gone through life and death with me. As long as I show myself, they will certainly not let you go. They are also the Tai Tsung tribulation spirits. They are not afraid of your identity. No matter how Ta Gu roared, Ning Fan just stared at him coldly in the night sky. His expression was filled with indifference. So what if you are the former 7th barbarian god? Even though my cultivation base is not as good as yours, I can still make you pay the price for attacking me. As the river was destroyed, the surrounding darkness was completely destroyed, revealing the bright and beautiful sky outside. Ning Fan returned to the bottom of the lake in the ruins of the valley. No matter how unwilling Ta Gu's massive shadow was, it had to be destroyed because as long as the river is destroyed, Ning Fan would have passed the 7th trial. At this moment, 4 drops of ancestral blood were produced in his body. After devouring the 4 drops of ancestral blood, Jia Shui's grade had taken a huge step towards the 3rd star realm. However, it had yet to break through to the 3rd star realm. It was still a little lacking, but it was not much. Perhaps, after passing the 8th trial, he would be able to advance to the 3rd star true blood realm. Do I still have to pass the 8th trial? Ning Fan hesitated. The 7th trial was already so difficult to pass. If it was someone else, even an immortal Emperor Realm old monster would have a slim chance of survival if they were trapped in the river. How many hacks did Ning Fan use to pass the 7th trial? How terrifying would the 8th trial be? A moment of carelessness and he might really die. He did not forget the feeling of losing his memories in the 7th trial. It was the feeling of forgetting even Jiha. It was as if he wanted to be sad and shed tears, but he forgot why he was sad and for whom he was crying. Ning Fan did not want to experience that kind of feeling again. However, with the life illusion pill in his hands, no matter how dangerous the 8th trial is, he should be able to keep his life. Brat, not bad. You actually passed the 7th trial. Did that barbarian god Ta Gu give you any treasures? The voice of the strange eyeball echoed to the bottom of the lake. That Ta Gu couldn't wait to tear me into pieces. How could he possibly give me any treasures? Ning Fan shook his head and chuckled. Couldn't wait to tear you into pieces? It can't be. Even if the barbarian god Palm really kills you during the tribulation, it's just to test whether you can pass the tribulation or not. It won't involve personal grudges. You didn't kill his son or steal his wife. Why would that Ta Gu want to tear you into pieces? Could it be that you have really done such a thing? Hee hee. The strange eyeball smiled wretchedly like a curious baby. His life was filled with curiosity. Ning Fan was too lazy to discuss these boring questions with the strange eyeball. If there was no reward, then there was no reward. He had already obtained great benefits from Pagoda, so there was no need for other rewards. Now, he was more concerned about how difficult the 8th trial was. He asked the strange eyeball about it. The latter immediately became spirited and asked excitedly. Brat, are you really going to pass the 8th trial? I don't have much confidence in passing it, but I still want to give it a try. Ning Fan smiled bitterly. Sigh. Yeah. The 8th trial is indeed very difficult. It's normal that you don't have confidence. Let alone you, even Ian Mo couldn't pass the 8th trial when he cultivated the barbarian Dao in the past. One should know that his cultivation base had already reached the immortal Emperor realm when he passed the 8th trial. However, he still failed. Since ancient times, there were only 74 young barbarians who passed the 8th trial. Moreover, more than half of them were at the peak immortal Emperor realm. With your current cultivation base, it's normal that you can't pass it. Don't be discouraged. However, you can try. It's said that there are benefits even if you can't pass the 8th trial. The strange eyeball said mysteriously. What benefits? Ning Fan was slightly surprised. The difficulty of the 8th trial was beyond his imagination. However, it did not surprise him as it was still within his expectations. What surprised him was that there were benefits even if he couldn't pass the 8th trial. I can feast my eyes. Does that count as a benefit? The content of the 7th trial is different for everyone. However, the content of the 8th trial is the same for everyone. It's the 4th barbarian god. She's the most beautiful woman in the history of the ancient barbarian world. She has big breasts and big buttocks. If I can just take a look at her, I can die in peace. Hee hee. Brat, you must pass this trial. If you don't, I won't be able to see the peerless beauty of the 4th barbarian god. I won't die in peace and I will. Ning Fan shook his head, feeling slightly disappointed. What's the benefit of feasting my eyes? This eyeball monster is really too mean. In order to take a look at a beautiful woman, it actually encouraged me to pass the 8th trial. The 8th trial is much more dangerous than the 6th and 7th trial. A slight mistake and I will die. When I was going through the 6th and 7th trial, the eyeball monster kept trying to persuade me not to go through the tribulation, telling me how dangerous it was. Now, suddenly, Ning Fan thought of something. He slowly walked out of the lake and gave the eyeball a meaningful smile. I won't go through the 8th trial. What? You actually gave up on going through the 8th trial? Are you a pig? You actually gave up the chance to see a beautiful woman. The 8th trial is dangerous, but can't you be a little braver and disregard your own life and death? Could it be that in your heart, your life is not as important as seeing a beautiful woman? The eyeball monster became anxious. So, in his heart, seeing a beautiful woman was more important than his life. Speaking of which, it's useless even if you don't want to go through the 8th trial. This time, I won't help you activate the heaven-deceiving formation. Hee hee. I want to see a beautiful woman. No matter how unwilling you are, the 8th trial will still descend. The eyeball thought for a while and gave a wretched smile. I have already memorized your heaven-deceiving formation. Even though the formation is mysterious, its level isn't too high. Now, I can also set it up. Green light flashed in Ning Fan's eyes. He had already memorized the heaven-deceiving formation at the lakeside. Even if the eyeball monster doesn't help him, he could also set up the formation himself and avoid the 8th trial. After hearing Ning Fan's words, the smile on the eyeball monster's face disappeared. Instead, it became anxious again. If Ning Fan sets up the formation himself and avoids the 8th trial, it really can't help him attract the 8th trial. In that case, it won't be able to see the beautiful woman. Are you really not going to help me fulfill this little wish of mine? Even if I die, I still want to see the 4th barbarian god once. The eyeball monster pretended to be pitiful with tears and snot running down his face. That's your wish, not mine. You stinking brat. Previously, in order to help you break the blessing technique, I had to pay 9 billion Dao crystals for you. I even used the souls of 43 experts and the Devil Star blood essence of the undying Great Emperor. He was threatening Ning Fan with his favor. That's because we both took what we needed. If you help me break the blessing technique, I will also help you kill Inma. Inwardly, Ning Fan was somewhat grateful for the eyeball monster's help. However, he did not say it out loud. Instead, he just stared at the eyeball monster meaningfully. You ungrateful brat. You are ungrateful and stubborn brat. You are unworthy of being the successor of ancient chaos and the descendant of the Lai origin sect. You are the shame of the Purple Do immortal region. You are. The eyeball cursed angrily. He really did not know what to do with Ning Fan. Ning Fan waited until the eyeball monster was tired of cursing and said with a smile. You help me break the blessing technique and I will help you kill Inma. It's the same thing. It's not impossible for you to ask me to take the risk to go through the 8th suffering technique if you want to see a beauty. However, you can't let me take the risk for nothing. As soon as Ning Fan said that, the eyeball monster understood what he meant. He stared at Ning Fan angrily. As it turned out, this brat wanted to ask for some benefits from him. It was not that he did not want to go through the 8th suffering technique at all. According to his personality, even if he could not go through it, he would at least give it a try. Damn it! This brat is eyeing my meager amount of wealth. The eyeball monster felt his heart aching. He knew that if he does not pay a price this time, Ning Fan would not let him look at the beauty in peace. Tell me, what benefits do you want so that you will help me fulfill my wish? The eyeball monster said angrily. My magic treasures have all been destroyed. Now, I'm lacking a suitable magic treasure. The separation and reunion sword and the rest of his magic treasures had all been destroyed. Ning Fan wanted to get some new magic treasures to use. The eyeball monster's wealth is really rich. He took out 9 billion Dao crystals just like that. There should be more than one innate magic treasure like the small iron cage. If I can get an innate magic treasure from him, it won't be bad. I risked my life to go through the 8th suffering technique just to let you see a beauty. How can it be justified if you don't give me some blood? The old devil taught Ning Fan everything about swindling and deceiving people. Even though Ning Fan rarely extorted people, this time, he had no choice but to hit the eyeball monster. There was no other reason. This eyeball monster was really asking for a beating. Alright. I will give you a 12 Nirvana magic treasure. That should be enough, right? Sigh. You have no idea how poor I will be after I help you break the blessing technique. There's no need to cry about being poor. Just give me a innate magic treasure and I will go through the 8th suffering technique for you. What? You actually want my innate magic treasure? Impossible. There's no room for negotiation. The eyeball monster stared at Ning Fan angrily. At this moment, large patches of red clouds appeared above the lake. The 8th suffering technique was about to arrive. Looking at Ning Fan's infuriated smile, the eyeball monster felt that Ning Fan was still expressionless for the first time. Fine. You win. You're the boss. I'm afraid of you now. After the 8th suffering technique, I will give you an innate magic treasure. Quickly prepare for the tribulation. As soon as the eyeball monster's voice fell, a faint scent of cosmetics had already filled the entire heaven and earth with the wind. The 8th suffering technique had arrived. He actually improved twice. How terrifying. Chapter 935. At first, it was the fragrance of cosmetics that permeated the heaven and earth. It was not heavy and it was as light as flowing water. However, it carried a hint of alluring sweetness. Then, it started raining flowers. Pink and white petals fell from the sky. No one knew what kind of flowers they were, but they carried a kind of poignant beauty. The strange eyeball's breathing suddenly became heavy. No one knew what organ he was using to breathe. The fourth barbarian god Shi Zihua, the most beautiful deity in the history of the ancient barbarian world. I didn't expect that I would really be able to see this legendary beauty. Good. Amidst the cheers of the weird-eyed chickens, the silhouette of an ancient city slowly appeared in the sky. It was an extremely dilapidated city. The city was engulfed in the flames of war and the long streets were filled with corpses. At the center of the city, there was an ancient royal palace that was collapsing bit by bit in the flames. In the sky above the royal palace, a large amount of divine light began to emerge. Within the divine light, the shadow of a lady wearing light pink veil slowly appeared. She landed outside the palace and stood under a cherry blossom tree. She looked at the palace that had collapsed in the flames of war in silence. Her beautiful curves were vaguely visible under the veil. She raised her wrist. Her slender hand was so fair that it did not match the flames of war in the surroundings. She gently stroked the hair on her temples. Her actions carried an indescribable charm but also an indescribable sorrow. Her appearance was very beautiful. It was like a painting that had aged quietly in the passage of time. However, her eyes that were like black gemstones carried a trace of indescribable sorrow. It was a sorrow that only a person who had lost their country could have. A broken sword that was stained with rust and blood was pierced into her chest. Blood kept flowing out from the wound. The blood stained her originally spotless body with filth. However, it added a sense of sorrowful beauty to her. She was the shadow of a mountain and sea that was left behind by the fourth barbarian god. Her true body had died a long time ago. The flames of war, the fallen royal palace, the broken sword and the blood were the scenes before her death. Ning Fan leaped into the bottom of the lake. The undying power in the lake immediately surged into his body to guard against the upcoming 8th trial. The strange phenomenon in the outside world did not escape his spirit sense. The fourth barbarian god was indeed very beautiful. However, it was not to the extent of making the world lose its color and the sun and moon lose their luster. However, the sorrow on her body were very touching. Voluptuous. Sure enough. She is indeed the beauty that I like the most. Ha ha ha. Even if I die now, it won't be in vain after I get to see her. He 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 he. Eyeball looked like a love-struck fool, staring at the sky foolishly, drooling. He had already begun to ignore everything that was happening in the outside world. He was completely captivated by the fourth god of Berserker's beauty. He was mesmerized by her beauty and lost himself in it, unable to free himself. Not only the strange eyeball, even Ning Fan who was in the lake gradually felt a sense of being unable to extricate himself. His eyes suddenly flashed with surprise. What made Ning Fan unable to extricate himself from it was not the beauty of the woman, but the enchanting power that made one's hair stand on end. The fourth barbarian Tao was actually and cultivated the Tao of the Tao. Her beauty might not be enough to move Ning Fan's Tao heart. However, the power of charm that she cultivates was enough to make most of the men in the world lose their minds. Even the laws of the heavenly Tao seemed to want to prostrate before her dress. Even the direction of their flow deviated. They circled around her back, forming a faintly discernible ring. Just like the beginning saint ring. The fourth god of berserkers was not an incipient saint, but the strength of her art of enchantment was enough to bewitch the great Tao, causing it to willingly go against its laws and create the incipient saint's ring for her. Even if she was not an incipient saint, in this world, there is actually someone who can cultivate the art of bewitchment to such a level. Even the great Tao can be bewitched. Ning Fan was secretly shocked. The yin-yang locket in his dantian was constantly emitting a cooling force, preventing him from sinking into the boundless charm of the fourth barbarian god. If it wasn't for the fact that he was the descendant of the ancient chaos and had the yin-yang locket with him, he would have been drooling and giggling at this woman like the eyeball monster. He would have been completely subdued in front of this woman like the great Tao of heaven. There were actually such charming cultivators in this world. It was truly terrifying. Since the destruction of the Nanman kingdom, very few people have been able to make it all the way to the 8th trial. The fourth god of Berserker's voice was very pleasant to the ears. There was a soft and sweet feeling to it, but there was a sadness in her tone that could not be wiped away. Her gaze moved away from the illusionary palace where the flames of war raged and swept across the lake below. At first glance, she saw silly Haha's eyeballs. She looked away with slight disdain. It's just another fallen person. In her life, she had seen too many men who fell under her dress. Some of them coveted her beauty while some of them fell under her bewitchment technique. There were too many of them. There were so many that she could only count with her fingers how many men could remain clear-headed in front of her. This eyeball monster was just one of the countless living beings who fell under her dress. It was not worth mentioning. Her eyes moved away from the strange eyeball and continued to look at the lake. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but they seemed to be sharper than any flying sword. They easily pierced through the pitch-black lake water and saw Ning Fan, who was at the bottom of the lake. Her eyes were originally very clear, like the flowing water formed after the snow melted in early spring. However, when she noticed that Ning Fan's eyes were devoid of lust, there was a slight ripple in that clear gaze. Her lips also curved into a rare smile. "You surprised me." It's because you didn't fall in front of me like the other men. Are you the cultivator who is going to undergo the 8th trial? You are very good. For the first time in countless years, the 4th barbarian god praised someone. However, when she noticed the mixed bloodline in Ning Fan's body, her brows immediately knitted together and her expression became cold again. You are not a barbarian. You are the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit. The 4th barbarian god's eyes became colder and colder. Even the temperature of heaven and earth plummeted. Ning Fan's back felt cold for no reason. Under the gaze of this woman, he actually felt like he was naked. It was as if there were no secrets that he could hide from the woman in front of him. In the past, the eyeball monster could also see through everything about him. However, Ta Gu could not do that even though he was the 7th barbarian god. This woman was just like the eyeball monster. She could see through everything about him. She was much stronger than Ta Gu. If you aren't the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit, I might have shown you mercy. Now, I won't hold back anymore. Unlike Ta Gu who treated the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit with respect and servility, this weak woman did not hide her disgust towards the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit at all. She was the 4th barbarian god. The ancient barbarian world had fallen in her hands. The shadow of the royal palace beneath her feet was the barbarian capital of the past. However, it had fallen in the flames of war. The broken sword in her chest was the sharp blade that took her life. It was the supreme treasure of the ancient Emperor Taizong. However, it was destroyed by her. She was the last barbarian god in the history of the ancient barbarian world who died standing. After her, all the other barbarian gods became the slaves of the Taizong tribulation spirit, just like Ta Gu. However, she was not one of them. To her, the Taizong tribulation spirit was not her master. Instead, it was the enemy who destroyed her country and her clan. They were her mortal enemies. I, Shi Zihua, summoned the tombs of the ancient barbarian world to bury this man. The 4th barbarian god gently raised her hand and pointed at Ning Fan from afar. The entire world immediately changed at this moment. Shadows of ancient battlefields began to appear between the mountains and seas, engulfing the place where Ning Fan was standing. The illusory shadows replaced the real world. The lake disappeared. The ruins of the valley disappeared. The eyeball monster also disappeared. Ning Fan stood alone on an ancient battlefield. Behind him were tribes and cities that were filled with blood and fire. The grassland in front of him was filled with broken limbs and magical treasures. There were collapsed mountains, rivers that were cut off by a sword and the sky that was torn apart. Where is this place? Ning Fan closed his eyes and got rid of the illusions in front of him. He could feel that his body was still at the bottom of the lake. The cold lake water flowed around him. But his soul, his consciousness, seemed to be mixed in this mysterious space. Is this the space formed by the 4th barbarian god's ability? Since you are the Taizong tribulation spirit, you will receive preferential treatment. Your 8th trial is different from the others. The 4th barbarian god's words were filled with hostility. Ning Fan's heart sank slightly. Just now, the eyeball monster said confidently that everyone's 8th trial was the same. Bullshit. I'm the only one who received special treatment. Other people's 8th trial would not be sucked into this battlefield. The 8th trial of an ordinary person was already as difficult as ascending the heavens. His 8th trial would probably be even more dangerous and difficult to pass. This 4th barbarian god seemed to have a deep hostility towards the bloodline of the Taizong tribulation spirit. The ancient barbarian tomb is the holy land of the barbarian race. The barbarian cities that were destroyed and the barbarians who died in battle are kept here. You are in the first level of the 4th tomb. Almost all the barbarian warriors who died in the hands of your Taizong tribe are kept here. If you want to pass the 8th trial, you must kill these warriors again. You can do it. The 4th barbarian god's voice reverberated between heaven and earth. The moment his voice resounded, the corpses that were either complete or incomplete stood up with dazed looks in their eyes. 10, 100, 1,000. Countless corpses filled the entire battlefield. They stood up one after another. Among them were the corpses of first-step cultivators and second-step cultivators. However, the ones with the highest cultivation base were only at the life-immortal realm. The corpses of those with higher cultivation bases were buried in the higher levels of the barbarian tomb. At this moment, they seemed to have regained life and glory. They saw Ning Fan. Sounds of gnashing teeth came from the mouths of these barbarians who had been dead for many years. Tai Tsung. Tribulation spirit. More and more barbarian cultivators' eyes turned blood red and were drowned by hatred. The ones who were closest to Ning Fan were 7 divine transformation realm barbarian cultivators. They had died countless years ago on the path to protect the ancient barbarian world. Their corpses were kept by the ancient barbarian tomb. Their souls would forever remain in the mountains and seas of this place. They hated the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit. Now, they wanted revenge. They wanted to take revenge against Ning Fan, the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit. The 7 divine transformation realm barbarian cultivators did not have any rationality at all. As soon as they got close to Ning Fan, they immediately chose to self-detonate. They knew that their cultivation bases were weak. Thus, they only hoped that their self-detonation could slightly injure Ning Fan. Bang! 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 The sound of self-detonation was deafening and filled the sky with blood mist. Then, the storm formed by the self-detonation of the 7 barbarian cultivators instantly drowned Ning Fan. What was Ning Fan's cultivation base? Putting aside Jie Shui's cultivation base, his magic power alone was already at the mid-true enlightenment realm. How would a dignified true immortal be afraid of the self-detonation of 7 divine transformation realm barbarians? However, the killing intent of the 7 divine transformation realm barbarian cultivators influenced him and the thousands of barbarian cultivators behind them. Kill the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit. Another tens of divine transformation realm and void refinement realm barbarian cultivators rushed towards Ning Fan and chose to self-detonate. There were even a few void fragmentation realm cultivators who leaped into the sky and turned into a few thousand zhang large black-feathered gigantic birds. These void fragmentation realm cultivators did not choose to self-detonate. Instead, they were determined to fight against Ning Fan. Ning Fan's expression was solemn. He respected those experts who had faith and died for their faith. However, it did not mean that he would let others attack him without retaliating. He could tell that the barbarian cultivators here were all people who had died many years ago. They had long lost their lives. However, there was an extremely strange Tao law in this place that allowed the corpses to retain their will when they were alive and continue to fight. That strange Tao law was 70 to 80% similar to the Tao law of undying. However, it was also different. The people here were all dead people. Moreover, all of them had a deep-rooted hatred towards the Tai Tsung tribulation spirit. Ning Fan's eyes were filled with a hint of apology. However, it was more determined. He drew out the memory-severing Tao sword towards the gigantic birds in the sky. Since he was already in this battlefield, the only thing he could do was to send them to their deaths. The memory-severing Tao sword turned into thousands of sword lights and easily killed the few gigantic birds. Their blood splattered across the sky. His actions enraged more barbarian cultivators. More and more barbarian cultivators rushed towards him like tidal waves. There were more than hundreds of millions of first-step cultivators. There were also hundreds of thousands of life-immortal realm cultivators. The barbarian cultivators here are just a portion of the cultivators who sacrificed themselves for the world in the past. Most of them didn't even have a chance to restrain themselves. All of them died in the hands of your Tai Tsung Tribulation Spirit clan. Countless clans of your clan have been annihilated. Have you ever seen the hatred in their hearts? I will wait for you in the 7th level of the ancient barbarian tomb. If you can come up, I will give you a chance to pass the 8th trial. If you can't, then you shall die here. Use your blood to avenge the hatred of my thousands of barbarian cultivators. The 4th barbarian god's voice drifted in the air like the wind. It was difficult to catch its trace. Hundreds of millions of barbarian cultivators rushed towards Ning Fan. Some of them self-destructed and some of them displayed their abilities. Some of them were even affected by their self-destruction and abilities. However, none of them retreated. Everyone's will was to kill Ning Fan because he was the Taitsung tribulation spirit. He was their enemy and they must kill him. Incinerate. Facing the tide of thousands of cultivators, Ning Fan suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a ray of black-red flame. There were densely packed runes flowing within the flame. It had a kind of demonic beauty. In the beginning, it was just a ray of flame. However, as soon as it soared into the sky, it immediately turned into a sea of fire that nearly drowned the entire world. When the flame burned, it let out the sound of wind and thunder. For a moment, the entire world was filled with thunder. This is the flame of Adversity Beast. You aren't a member of the Adversity Beast clan. Why do you have this flame? The fourth barbarian god's cold voice resounded between heaven and earth. The flame of Adversity Beast was unparalleled under the heavens. Since ancient times, countless fire cultivators had coveted the flames of the Adversity Beast clan and tried to devour some of them. However, all of them failed. Even though the flame of Adversity Beast was unparalleled under the heavens, it also had another characteristic. It could not be used together with other flames. It was impossible for those fire cultivators to devour the flame of Adversity Beast to strengthen their own flames. However, this Taitsung tribulation spirit managed to do it. What was going on? The fourth barbarian god was a little puzzled. Naturally, she did not know that Ning Fan was the successor of Great Emperor Ancient Chaos. What he cultivated was the yin-yang transformation and the chaotic rings art. Among them, the yin-yang transformation was the foundation of the chaotic rings art. This cultivation method had the mysterious power to fuse the two different powers of yin and yang into one. Even the bloodlines of the divine, demon, devil and tribulation races could be fused together under the power of the yin-yang transformation. Thus, the mere flame of Adversity Beast naturally could not escape from Ning Fan's devouring and utilization. Ning Fan's devil flame was already at the level of the 11 darkness true fire. Moreover, it possessed the domineering offensive power of the flame of Adversity Beast. As the flames burned the heavens and earth, countless first-step cultivators were burned to ashes by the devil flame. Even those life-immortal realm experts with profound cultivation bases could only withstand the attack of the devil flame. They could not fight back at all. Tens of thousands of barbarian cultivators were burned to death under the devil flame. After witnessing this scene, the fourth barbarian god knew that the barbarian corpses in the first level of the ancient barbarian tomb were no match for Ning Fan. If they continue to fight, they would just be destroying the corpses in vain. Fine. You've passed the first level. Come to the second level. Don't destroy their corpses anymore. The fourth barbarian god sighed and compromised. Since the first level could not hurt Ning Fan, he could only look at the second level. As soon as the fourth barbarian god's voice fell, the barbarian cultivators who were originally in high spirits fell to the ground and turned back into corpses. In the sky, divine light burst out and a heavenly stairway that led to the second level appeared. There were also wooden boxes with ancient seals appearing in the sky one after another. Chapter 936. Following the fourth barbarian god's order, hundreds of millions of barbarian cultivators fell to the ground and turned back into corpses. Ning Fan's eyes indifferently scanned across these corpses and withdrew his devil flames. He did not plan to burn these corpses to ashes. From the fourth barbarian god's words, Ning Fan understood his current situation. At that moment, he was in the first layer of the ancient berserker's tomb, and the fourth god of berserkers was in the seventh layer. Only by killing his way to the seventh level would he have the chance to pass the eighth trial stage. Otherwise, he would have to activate the heaven-deceiving array and give up on the eighth trial stage. Ning Fan closed his eyes and sensed the situation outside. His consciousness was trapped in the first layer of the ancient berserker tomb by the fourth god of berserkers. His physical body was still sitting cross-legged at the bottom of the lake outside, but it was as if he had lost his soul, unable to move at all. Ning Fan tried to return his consciousness to his body, but he realized that he was unable to do so. The eyeball monster continued to be infatuated with the fourth god of berserkers and drooled at the sky. It was immersed in the beauty of the fourth god of berserkers and had no intention of waking up. As expected, he was a pervert who only knew how to screw over his teammates. Ning Fan's original plan was to pass the 8th trial if he could. If he couldn't, he would activate the heaven-deceiving formation and give up on this trial. However, his consciousness could not return to his body, and he could not activate the heaven-deceiving formation in the outside world. He could only rely on the eyeball monster. Unfortunately, the eyeball monster was unreliable, and it was unknown when it would wake up. Before he regained consciousness, he naturally could not activate the heaven-deceiving formation to save Ning Fan's life. In other words, before the eyeball wakes up, I can't use the power of the formation to leave this place, unless I get through the 8th trial. Even if they encountered countless dangers in the 8th trial, they still couldn't leave. They could only brace themselves and continue on. What a strange pair of eyes. Ning Fan knitted his brows. In the end, he turned into a ray of golden light and flew towards the higher sky along the heaven stairway. At the end of the stairway, there was an altar covered in paper money. The altar was octagonal, but there were 9 stone pillars on it. The 9 stone pillars formed an ancient teleportation array that led straight to the 2nd level of the ancient barbarian tomb. After the altar appeared, more and more wooden boxes appeared in the sky, floating aimlessly. The seal on the wooden chest was very mysterious. It could isolate a cultivator's spiritual sense from probing it. As soon as Ning Fan's spirit sense came into contact with those wooden chests, it was gently pushed away by a gentle force. He could not use his spirit sense to examine those wooden chests. I wonder what's in these wooden boxes. After his eyes were covered with the green light, he looked at the wooden boxes again. This time, his gaze could slightly penetrate through the restrictions on the wooden boxes. He saw that in each wooden box, there was a magic treasure sealed. Most of the magic treasures were low-grade and mid-grade immortal artifacts, and some of the better ones were only high-grade immortal artifacts. There wasn't even a single artificial immortal artifact. Moreover, these magic treasures were mostly covered in rust and didn't have much spirituality left. They'd existed for countless years and were already old to the point of being difficult to use. Low-grade and shabby. Ning Fan didn't covet these magical treasures at all. He flew straight to the altar, prepared to use the formation of the altar to enter the 2nd level. However, as soon as he stepped onto the altar, the dignified voice of an old man rang out. According to the order of Dao Man Mountain, those who pass the first test of the Ancient Man Tomb can take a treasure from this place. If you don't take the treasure, it will be considered as giving up the reward and you won't be allowed to enter the 2nd floor. Those who take more will be punished by Dao Man Mountain's finger. Ning Fan was slightly stunned. This voice was left behind by a powerful cultivator in this place. It had existed for countless years. Originally, he didn't think much of the broken magical treasures here, but the voice demanded him to take a treasure from this place. Otherwise, he wouldn't be allowed to enter the 2nd floor. Ning Fan gave it a try. Before he took the treasure, he really couldn't activate the teleportation formation to enter the 2nd floor. There was a rule set by a powerful cultivator in this teleportation formation. One must take the treasure from this place before he could enter the teleportation formation. What a troublesome rule, forget it. Even though I don't think much of the broken magical treasures here, I'll just take one. Ning Fan wasn't picky. He randomly chose a wooden box that was closest to him and waved at it. The wooden box immediately moved closer to Ning Fan and opened on its own. The magical treasure that was sealed in the wooden box was a palm-sized shabby golden shield. It was just a mid-grade immortal artifact. Due to the fact that the shield was extremely shabby, the power it could exert might not even be comparable to a void fragmentation realm magical treasure. What a useless shield, this brat actually chose the shield. Does he know something? Otherwise, why would he choose the shield among the thousands of magical treasures? The 4th barbarian god's beautiful eyes revealed a serious expression for the first time. The ancient barbarian tomb was the holy land of the barbarian race. It was created by the first barbarian god Dao Man Shan with his own strength. Not only was it a place to store the corpses of barbarian cultivators, but it was also the place where the previous barbarian gods tested their disciples. Of course, The ancient barbarian tomb had a more important mission. A supreme treasure was buried here. There was a rule set by the first barbarian god Dao Man Shan in the ancient barbarian tomb. Any cultivator who passed the first floor would receive a reward. The fourth barbarian god couldn't interfere or stop this rule. Her original intention was to let Ning Fan die in the ancient barbarian tomb, but she couldn't stop Ning Fan from receiving the reward. You have chosen the 5-star mid-grade barbarian weapon, the Golden Shield. Now, you can enter the second floor. The old man's voice resounded again. The moment the voice resounded, all the wooden boxes disappeared. Ning Fan finally entered the second floor of the ancient barbarian tomb through the teleportation formation. Ning Fan had already put away the shabby shield and left it at the side. At this moment, he was cautiously looking at the corpses in the second floor. The number of corpses was obviously lesser than the first floor, but each of them was a corpse of Du Zhen. There were more than 10,000 of them scattered around. The moment Ning Fan entered the second floor, the corpses stood up unsteadily. Their eyes glinted with ferocious light as if they were alive. Kill the Tai Tsung Jieling. Protect the glory of the ancient barbarian tribe. Kill. Roars filled the air. Each of them carried the hatred of the annihilation of their entire tribe. At this moment, nearly 10,000 cultivators of the Du Zhen barbarian tribe who had been dead for many years rushed towards Ning Fan and surrounded him. An early Du Zhen barbarian tribe middle-aged man was the fastest. He chose to self-detonate when he was only 1,000 zhang away from Ning Fan. With the point of self-detonation as the center, the chaotic law of the Great Tao gushed out like a flood. A destructive storm that could destroy a cultivation planet swept across the distance of 1,000 zhang, trying to engulf Ning Fan within it. The self-detonation of a cultivator of the Du Zhen barbarian tribe was extremely powerful. Even the thought-breaking old monster did not dare to stand still and let the enemy self-detonate. Ning Fan, of course, would not stand still like an idiot. He suddenly raised his hand and pressed his 5 fingers forward. The heaven and earth in front of him seemed to have frozen under his pressure. That destructive storm was also extinguished by him. Even the Shikong old monster could not withstand the self-detonation of the Du Zhen barbarian tribe so easily. However, Ning Fan did it without any effort. His body began to emit a monstrous red light. At this moment, he had used the power of the Jie Shui. His qi was violent and crazy. At this moment, his strength was almost comparable to an old monster at the peak of the thought-breaking realm. It was not difficult for him to self-detonate the Du Zhen barbarian tribe. His strength was incomparable to that of the Shikong old monster. Another 10 or so cultivators of the Du Zhen barbarian tribe sneakily attacked him from behind. This time, Ning Fan did not even turn his head. The red light on his body became even brighter. That red light even turned into countless tangible red lines that flew out. As soon as those red lines flew out, they immediately turned into red light of tribulation sense that was as thick as a thumb. They made an air-piercing sound and attacked the barbarian cultivators who were close to Ning Fan. A mid-Du Zhen barbarian tribe cultivator saw a red light in front of him before he could even attack Ning Fan. In the next moment, a red light of tribulation sense easily penetrated the top of his skull. It went into his sea of consciousness and left a bloody hole the size of a thumb on his forehead. As the tribulation sense red light wantonly destroyed his body, the cultivator died. Another burly man who refined his body tried to get close to Ning Fan and sneakily attack him with his fist. However, the moment he swung his fist, a red light penetrated his skull. 1, 2, 3. Ning Fan killed more and more barbarian cultivators of the Du Zhen barbarian tribe. With the strength of his Jie Shui, killing Du Zhen barbarian tribe cultivators was as easy as taking something out of his pocket. The fourth barbarian god knitted her brows. She knew that the corpses in the second floor still could not stop Ning Fan. However, this time, she did not stop the massacre. An hour later, Ning Fan stood on the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood in the second floor. Even though he had killed all the barbarian cultivators of the Du Zhen barbarian tribe, there were still many wounds on his body. This was the reason why the fourth barbarian god did not stop him. The corpses in the second floor were not sacrificed in vain. Their sacrifice could make Ning Fan pay for it. The heavenly stairway that led to the third floor slowly appeared. At the end of the stairway was an octagonal altar. There were 9 ancient stone pillars that formed a teleportation formation. As soon as the altar appeared, tens of thousands of stone chests made of bluestone appeared in the sky. Magical treasures were also sealed in these stone chests. The lowest among them was a first Nirvana acquired immortal treasure, while the highest was a third Nirvana immortal treasure. Of course, all of the magical treasures were very shabby and some of them were even half destroyed. A third Nirvana immortal treasure, huh? It's still useless. Ning Fan did not look at these stone chests. Instead, he turned into a ray of golden light and rushed towards the altar. The moment he stepped on the altar, the voice of an old man resounded between heaven and earth. According to Dao Man Shan's order, if you want to enter the third floor, you must exchange the treasure you obtained from the first floor for another treasure. You are only allowed to exchange for the same type of magical treasure. If you forcefully take the magical treasure from this place, you will be punished by Dao Man Shan's finger. The voice reverberated between heaven and earth for a few times before disappearing. There were originally tens of thousands of stone chests in this place, but as soon as the voice resounded, countless stone statues immediately disappeared from the heaven and earth. In just a few breaths' time, there were only slightly more than 40 stone chests left for Ning Fan to choose from. Ning Fan was slightly startled. It seemed that if he wanted to enter the third floor, he must exchange the golden shield he obtained from the first floor for a magical treasure in the second floor. The remaining 40 over stone chests all had shield-type magical treasures sealed inside. Ning Fan had chosen the shield in the first floor, so he could only exchange the shield in the second floor. Among the 40 over stone chests, the shield with the highest grade was a second Nirvana-acquired silver shield. After pondering for a moment, Ning Fan chose this stone chest. When he made his choice, the golden shield in his hand along with the other stone chests disappeared in an instant. Only the silver shield that he chose flew out of the stone chest by itself and into his hand. You have chosen the middle grade 6-star barbarian treasure, Ling Shao Shield. Now, you can enter the third floor. Holding the silver shield in his hand, Ning Fan slightly pondered. In the first floor, he obtained a middle grade immortal treasure golden shield. In the second floor, he exchanged the golden shield for a second Nirvana acquired silver shield. If I get to the third floor, will I be able to exchange for a shield of a higher grade? If I get to the fourth floor, fifth floor, perhaps this shabby small shield is not useless after all. After keeping the Ling Shao shield temporarily, Ning Fan entered the third floor of the ancient barbaric tomb through the teleportation formation on the altar. There were fewer corpses in the third floor. There were only 1,000 of them, but each of them was a void-shedding corpse. Kill the Tai Tsung Jia Ling. Protect my barbaric mountain and sea. Kill. More than 1,000 void-shedding barbarian cultivators crawled up from the ground and roared furiously. Their aura force was earth-shattering. Ning Fan's eyes finally showed a serious expression. Without waiting for the void-shedding barbarian cultivators to attack, he waved his hand and released countless red lines, taking the initiative to attack. The red lines turned into red rays of tribulation intent and attacked each of the void-shedding barbarian cultivators. Only a few Shishi Void primary stage cultivators were unable to block the red beam's attack. The red beam pierced through their skulls and destroyed their sea of consciousness, killing them. Although most of the barbarian cultivators were injured by the red light of tribulation sense, they did not die. Instead, they gained the strength to resist Ning Fan. After all, the group of cultivators had already reached the Renhuang Emptiness Realm. Within the four heavens, the Renhuang Emptiness Realm cultivators were all famous giants. How could they be instantly killed by a group of cultivators? One by one, the void-abandoning barbarian cultivators unleashed their divine arts, and countless images of Tao appeared in the world. There were images of wild apes striking the sky, lightning chariots crashing into the sun, and ancient barbarians creating humans. All of these were the prelude to these cultivators casting their great divine abilities. At the next moment, thousands of void-rending divine abilities attacked Ning Fan. The colorful rays of magic techniques were so dazzling that no one could open their eyes. I can't, Ning Fan sighed softly. Even though his current strength had skyrocketed and he was almost comparable to a peak thought fragmentation realm expert, it was still impossible for him to take on the joint attack of more than 1,000 Shikong cultivators head-on. Not to mention him, even the true 10,000 ancient immortal venerables would not be able to withstand it. Even though he might not be able to withstand the joint attack of the group of cultivators, it did not mean that he could not avoid it. Ning Fan leaped and turned into a ray of golden light. In an instant, he ran out of the attacking range of the group of cultivators, causing their joint attack to miss its target. He hovered high in the sky, looking down at the group of cultivators below him. After pondering for a while, he decided to use the Oblivion Current technique that he had just learned. This technique was the secret technique that the 7th barbarian god Tagu was famous for. Among the divine abilities of the Immortal Emperor realm, it could be considered as a top-notch great divine ability. This technique could turn the Tao into a long river, making everything that could not be erased disappear and flow into oblivion. Ning Fan had already formed 11 million annihilation runes. The destructive power of this technique was already very impressive. I use bones as a mountain. 11 million annihilation runes flew out from Ning Fan's body. All of a sudden, they covered the entire sky, making it look like the devil clouds of doomsday. Under the countless runes, the shadow of a black bone mountain slowly appeared. Gradually, the number of bone mountains in the sky increased. The second mountain, the third mountain, the fourth mountain. The number of bone mountains continued to increase until the 9th mountain stopped. At the moment when the 9 bone mountains appeared, the expressions of all the barbarian cultivators changed. They felt a tremendous force descending from the sky, making them breathless and unable to fly up into the sky. It was as if each of them was carrying 9 gigantic mountains on their shoulders and they were being suppressed by the power of the 9 mountains. Under the suppression of this tremendous force, not to mention using their divine abilities to attack Ning Fan, even their breathing began to quicken. Their chi was obviously in a mess and it was difficult for them to bear the weight. There were even a few cultivators who were directly crushed by the tremendous force and fell to their knees on the ground. They could not bear the might of Ning Fan's 9 mountains. Blood as a sea. A black sea suddenly appeared under the 9 mountains. Very soon, the second sea and the third sea appeared one after another. The strange phenomenon only stopped when the 8th sea appeared. After the 8 seas appeared, heaven and earth immediately fell into darkness. Everything seemed to have disappeared. Heaven and earth had changed. A few barbarian cultivators who were shrouded in the darkness directly fell into confusion and began to fall. At this moment, Ning Fan raised his palm. The place where his finger passed through easily tore heaven and earth apart. Palm as the Tao. He raised his palm and pressed it towards the barbarian cultivators below him, just like what Tagu had done in the past. As soon as he pressed his palm, the 9 mountains disappeared and the 8 seas converged into one, turning into a long black river that flowed quietly. Ning Fan stood on the river while the barbarian cultivators sank into the water. Each of them wore a terrified expression. To their horror, they realized that as soon as they fell into the river, they could not break free even with their cultivation base. They could not break free and could not resist. All they could do was sink to the bottom of the river bit by bit. Moreover, their cultivation base, Tao sense, life force, memories and everything else began to dissolve in this long black river. Bit by bit, everything turned into oblivion and disappeared without a trace, Tao as the oblivion current. Ning Fan put down his palm and formed hundreds of hand seals in one go. Immediately, the undercurrent in the entire river began to surge. This technique was called Tao as the oblivion current. It was the strongest ability that Ning Fan could display now. Unfortunately, he did not have as many annihilation runes as Tagu. Thus, this technique could not be as powerful as Tagu's. If Tagu uses this technique, all of them would probably die within a few breaths once they sink to the bottom of the river. None of them would be spared. When Ning Fan used this technique, he could not kill all the barbarians in a short period of time. Only a few of them died in the first few breaths. Most of the barbarians only died one after another after enduring this technique for more than 100 breaths. However, there were more than 20 peak Shifu Void Realm experts who joined hands with each other. Even after 1,000 breaths had passed, they did not die. Unfortunately, how long could they last? Ning Fan stood on the River of Annihilation, trapping the 20 over peak Shifu Void Realm experts at the bottom of the river for 1 day and 1 night. After 1 day and 1 night, the 20 over peak Shifu Void Realm experts had to die no matter how unwilling they were. After killing all the barbarians, Ning Fan dispelled the Oblivion Current technique. Both his body and mind were exhausted. Even though the Oblivion Current technique was powerful, it also consumed a lot of energy from his body. The stairway to the 4th level had already appeared, and tens of thousands of metal boxes had appeared in the sky. Ning Fan did not immediately ascend the sacrificial altar. Instead, he chose to sit cross-legged in meditation. After recovering his strength for a while, he ascended the sacrificial altar. According to the orders of Dao Barbarian Mountain, you have passed the test of the 3rd level and can exchange the shield in your hand for one of the shields of the 10 nations. After that, you can enter the 4th level. The old man's dignified voice rang out once more. The iron boxes in the air disappeared one after another, leaving only 10 iron boxes floating in front of Ning Fan. There was a shield sealed in each of the 10 metal boxes, and the name and grade of the shield were written on the outside of each metal box. Su Country's Mysterious Fire Shield, mid-grade 7 stars. Demon Kingdom Sea Illuminating Shield, 7 stars high grade. Sun Cloud Shield of the Ape Nation, upper grade 7 stars. Mirage Sea Country Haze Traversing Sky Shield, high grade 7 star. Thunder Shield of Lei Chin Kingdom, peak of 7 stars. Su Guahai Turtle Shield, medium grade 7 stars. Da Nation's Rainbow Wing Shield, top grade 7 stars. Qi Country's East Mountain Shield, peak 7 star. Gu Country's Heaven Battling Shield, peak 6 star. Lu Country's Wuya Shield, low grade 7 stars. Ning Fan's gaze swept across the 10 iron boxes. What interested him more were the 2 shields that had reached the peak of 7 stars. They were the Thunder Shield of Lei Chin Kingdom and the Eastern Mountain Shield of Qi Country. According to Ning Fan's estimation, a 5-star barbarian weapon was equivalent to an immortal treasure. A 6-star barbarian weapon was equivalent to a 1st to 4th Nirvana post-celestial treasure. A 7-star barbarian weapon was equivalent to a 5th to 8th Nirvana post-celestial treasure. These 2 peak 7-star shields were already equivalent to an 8th Nirvana post-celestial treasure. They were not considered as weak treasures. If Ning Fan had to exchange the Divine Firmament Shield for one of the shields, he would probably exchange it for one of the 2. Which one should I exchange for? Ning Fan muttered to himself. While he was pondering, the 4th god of barbarians' delicate face showed a hint of nervousness for the first time. The 10 Nations Shield was a test that the 1st god of barbarian Dao, Man Shan, gave to his descendants. Only those who were fated to choose the Shield of Inheritance would have the chance to inherit the supreme treasure left behind by the 1st god of barbarian. The 4th god of barbarian didn't want the supreme treasure to fall into the hands of Ning Fan, the Grand Firmament Tribulation Spirit. That would be a blasphemy to the sacred relic of the barbarian race. If one didn't choose a shield-type magical treasure on the 1st floor, he wouldn't have the chance to get it. If one didn't choose the Shield of Inheritance on the 3rd floor, he wouldn't have the chance to get the sacred relic either. This young man chose the shield on the 1st floor. This might just be a coincidence. The secret of the ancient barbarian tomb's inheritance was only known by the first 4 barbarian gods. Even the 5th god of barbarian didn't know about it because the barbarian gods after the 5th generation were the slaves of Grand Firmament. They didn't have the right to know about this secret. This young man isn't a barbarian god. It's impossible for him to know the secret of the ancient country god exterminating shield. He won't choose the Shield of Inheritance. He definitely won't. Under the slightly nervous gaze of the 4th god of barbarian, Ning Fan finally made a decision and raised his hand towards the Thunder Shield. Not only was the shield of the highest grade, but its body was also condensed with the Tao of Lightning. Its power was extraordinary. If Ning Fan had to choose one out of the 10 shields, he would rather choose this shield. He made the wrong choice. The fourth god of Barbarian heaved a sigh of relief. She even started to look down on Ning Fan. What she looked down on was that Ning Fan was indeed very shallow. He could only see the power of the Thunder Shield but not the scariness of the Shield of Inheritance. It was no wonder. Even with her eyesight, which was comparable to an incipient Saint Realm expert, it was still difficult for her to see how extraordinary the Shield of Inheritance was. What kind of ability did Ning Fan have? It wouldn't be strange if he couldn't see through it. There's no need to look anymore. This young man made a wrong choice. He won't have the chance to get the ancient country god exterminating shield. The fourth god of Barbarian closed her beautiful eyes slightly, as if she was disdainful to look at it anymore. However, at the next moment, she suddenly opened her eyes. Her clear eyes were filled with nervousness again. It was because Ning Fan had put his hand down again. His gaze moved away from the Thunder Shield of Lei Chin country and landed on the 9th metal box. It was the ancient country heaven battling shield. This shield was just a peak 6-star barbaric weapon which was equivalent to a 4th Nirvana post-celestial Nirvana realm magical treasure. Its power should not be comparable to the Thunder Shield. However, when Ning Fan looked at the shield, he frowned for the first time. No matter how he looked at it, it was just an ordinary shield. Why did it give him a feeling of fear and trepidation? It seems strange. Chapter 937. That feeling of trepidation only lasted for a moment, but it was enough to attract Ning Fan's attention. There was definitely something strange about this ancient kingdom battling heaven's shield. However, for some unknown reason, it looked very ordinary on the surface. There was nothing special about it. On the surface, the shield was covered in rust and its spiritual light was dim. There were even many cracks on it. Although it was a 4th Nirvana post-celestial treasure, it was too shabby and didn't have much power left. Its defensive power might not even be comparable to a 1st Nirvana magic treasure. Why would such a magical treasure give Ning Fans a feeling of fear and trepidation? Why? Perhaps there was a great mystery behind this shield. Even Ning Fan, who was at the 2nd level of the heavenly being realm, could not see through it. Or perhaps, that feeling of trepidation was just an illusion. Ning Fan remained silent for a while and finally made up his mind. Be it the Thunderclap Shield or the Eastern Mountain Shield, they were merely 8th Nirvana post-celestial treasures that were dispensable. The only thing he could not see through was the ancient country warring shield. If that feeling of fear was not an illusion, then there must be something extraordinary about this shield. I want this shield. Ning Fan's eyes flashed with determination. He exchanged the Ling Shao shield in his hand for the heaven battling shield of the ancient country. The 4th barbarian god's pretty face was as cold as ice. She had never expected that Ning Fan would actually see through the extraordinariness of the heaven battling shield and choose it. Perhaps it could be explained as a coincidence that he had chosen a shield-type Dharma treasure at the beginning. But this time, it was definitely not a coincidence. This lad must have sensed the extraordinariness of the heaven battling shield, which was why he chose it. This kid has such sharp eyesight. If it wasn't because of Ning Fan's identity as the Taitsung Tribulation Spirit, the 4th barbarian god really wanted to praise him. This is troublesome. Once the boy chose this shield, he would be considered as the scion of the Tao of Berserkers. Even if he was a tribulation spirit of grand heaven, he would not be attacked by the berserker corpses in this place. This is the rule set by the first god of berserkers. Even I cannot go against it. I'm afraid it won't be easy to kill this brat in the ancient barbarian tomb. Moreover, if I'm not careful, this brat might inherit the sacred treasure of the barbarian Tao. The 4th god of berserkers sighed faintly, and there was a hint of unwillingness in his voice. She could already foresee the scene where Ning Fan would arrive at the 7th floor without any obstructions. All of this was because Ning Fan had chosen the Shield of Inheritance in the 3rd level. The ancient nation Heaven Warring Shield itself was a damaged enchanted treasure. Its defensive abilities were ordinary and not worth mentioning, but because it contained a legacy mark from the first god of berserkers, Man Shan, it had an extremely special meaning. Barbarian Dao Shan was the first god of berserkers in the ancient berserkers world and also the strongest god of berserkers. Even some sages were unable to see through the imprint he had planted. Ning Fan similarly could not see through it. At most, he could vaguely sense that this shield was extraordinary. It was already extremely rare. The person with this shield would be the inheritor of the Barbarian Dao Mountain and would have the chance to accept the test and obtain the inheritance of the Barbarian Dao Mountain. Regardless of the identity of the person holding the shield, they would be protected by the Barbarian Mountain and would not be attacked in the ancient Barbarian tomb. This was the rule set by the first god of berserkers, and even the fourth god of berserkers could not go against it. The ancient country heavenly warring shield was just a palm-sized shield. When it touched his hand, it felt cold. Within that coldness, there seemed to be a remnant will which was vague and indistinct, making it impossible to see it clearly. This shield is indeed strange. Ning Fan glanced at the heaven-battling shield of the ancient country a few times and no longer paid any attention to it. He kept the shield and slowly stepped into the teleportation formation at the center of the altar. In the next moment, the ancient and majestic voice slowly sounded. Among the 10 nations' shields, you chose the ancient nation heaven-battling shield. From now on, you are the successor of the Dao Barbarians and are qualified to participate in the Dao Barbarian trial. The fourth layer is the first stage of the Dao of Berserkers. If you can pass it, you can use the ancient nation heaven warring shield to exchange for one item from the many relics left behind. The moment the voice rang out, all the metal boxes in the world disappeared, and the relocation formation that led to the fourth layer gradually lit up. Ning Fan was slightly startled. He did not know that choosing the heaven-battling shield of the ancient country would make one the successor of the Dao Barbarian tribe. He did not know anything about the successor of the Dao Berserker, the trial of the Dao Berserker, or the first stage of the Dao Berserker. The only thing he knew was that this shield was indeed extraordinary. He was right. With the power of the teleportation formation, Ning Fan entered the fourth level of the ancient barbaric tomb. There were only slightly more than 100 barbarian corpses in the fourth level of the tomb. Each of them was a corpse of broken thoughts. The moment Ning Fan stepped into the fourth level, the barbarian corpses stood up unsteadily from the ground. Their eyes were bursting with monstrous killing intent. There were even roars that soared to the sky. Kill the Tai Tsung Jia Ling. Dao Protector Barbarian Immortal. Kill. Ning Fan was not afraid of a single strand of broken thoughts. However, when more than 100 strands of broken thoughts overlapped with each other, Ning Fan could not ignore them. When more than 100 strands of broken thoughts joined hands, even an ancient immortal venerable would not be able to defeat them. Being locked on by more than 100 strands of broken thoughts, Ning Fan naturally did not dare to be careless. His expression was as if he was facing a formidable enemy and he activated his tribulation power to the maximum. His white robe shone with dazzling red light. At this moment, Ning Fan was fearless even though he was facing the siege of hundreds of broken thoughts. The current him had the strength to deal with the situation in front of him. This would be a tough battle. However, he would not lose. He had the confidence to do so. On the ancient battlefield, smoke filled the air and killing intent surged. Finally, the barbarian cultivators of the broken thoughts launched their attacks at Ning Fan. Just as Ning Fan was about to take action, a ray of light flew out on its own and stood in front of him to protect him. That ray of light was the ancient kingdom heaven battling shield. As soon as the heaven battling shield appeared, the 100 or so barbarian cultivators who were surging with killing intent were all stunned and stopped in their tracks. No one dared to attack Ning Fan anymore. No one dared to roar at Ning Fan anymore. Suddenly, an ancient mark of a dark red mountain emerged on the heaven battling shield which was originally ordinary. As soon as the mark appeared, an earth-shattering aura force swept across the entire fourth level. The strength of that aura force had already exceeded Ning Fan's understanding. It was the aura force of a true saint. There was no way to resist it. Fortunately, this aura force had no intention of harming anyone. It was just a flash, but it was enough to shake people's hearts. It made Ning Fan shudder once again. He finally understood why the ordinary-looking heaven-battling shield of the ancient kingdom could strike fear into his heart. It turned out that there was once a saint with an exceedingly high cultivation base who planted an imprint on this small shield. That aura force is too strong. Ning Fan secretly compared it in his mind. I'm afraid that even people at the same level as the Undying Realm and the Ancient Chaos Realm do not have such an aura force. The strength of this person is much, much stronger than the Undying Realm and the Ancient Chaos Realm. This young man has the Ancient Kingdom shield. He is the successor of the Dao barbarian lineage. Those who harm him will be punished by my finger. I will not tolerate it. At this moment, a voice slowly resounded between heaven and earth. This voice was clearly the same as the dignified and old voice from before. This voice was actually on Ning Fan's side, intending to protect him. Although the voice was not strict, none of the barbarian cultivators dared to disregard his order. It was because this voice was the voice of the first barbarian god, Man Shan. No barbarian cultivator dared to go against his will. Each of the Broken Thoughts barbarian cultivators looked at Ning Fan reluctantly. With Man Shan's order, they did not dare to attack Ning Fan. They could only turn back into corpses and fall to the ground. The fourth barbarian god on the 7th level smiled bitterly. She had already foreseen this scene. As long as this young man chooses the inheritance shield, no barbarian cultivator will dare to harm him. Even if this young man is the enemy of the ancient barbarian world. The Taitsung Jialing, if this young man chooses the inheritance shield, he will be the successor of the Dao barbarian lineage. No one in the ancient barbarian tomb dares to harm him, but it does not mean that he will walk out of this place alive. The descendants of the Dao barbarian lineage have to go through 3 trials. Those trials are extremely dangerous. Even if I participate in it, I can only pass the first trial at most. I will definitely die in the second trial. This young man's cultivation base is not high. He probably won't even be able to pass the first trial. The 4th level might be his burial ground. On the 4th level, Ning Fan's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the corpses falling to the ground. He did not expect to be protected after choosing the Ancient Kingdom Heaven Battling Shield. In this case, he should not be attacked by the barbarian corpses in the ancient barbarian tomb. Is this the benefit of choosing the Heaven Battling Shield? Rumble.as loud noises reverberated in the air, a flight of stairs appeared in the sky. At the end of the stairs was the teleportation formation that led to the altar on the 5th level. There were also boxes made of red copper floating in the air. Each of the boxes was glowing with the light of treasures, indicating that the items inside the boxes were extraordinary. This time, even with Ning Fan's 2nd level Heaven Realm eyesight, he could not see what was inside the boxes. The level of the seals on these copper boxes was too high. He did not have the time to care about what was inside the boxes. At this moment, a shadow slowly appeared on the altar and stood with his hands clasped behind his back. That shadow was an elderly man in red robes. His appearance was very old and his back was hunched. His body was thin and dry, but his eyes were as bright as the starry sky. There was a dark red mark of a small mountain on the old man's forehead. He could vaguely feel a monstrous ferocious aura emanating from it. It actually made Ning Fan feel bloodthirsty. Behind the elderly man, there were 3 indistinct rings. They were kept into his body with a single thought. Those 3 rings were obviously the saint rings that only a true saint could possess. However, in Ning Fan's impression, even a primordial saint should only have 1 saint ring. This elderly man in red robes, however, had 3 saint rings. What is his cultivation base? I am Man Shan of the first barbarian god Dao. After my death, I left behind the shadow of the mountains and seas, which will never be destroyed, so you are the one who chose the shield of inheritance. The elderly man in red robes said in a dignified voice. It was not a question but a confirmation. If that's the case, you are qualified to accept the trial of my Dao barbarian lineage. This is the first trial. No one will disturb you. If you pass the trial, you are qualified to exchange the Heaven Battling Shield for one of the items that I left behind. If you fail, you will die. Now, the trial begins. As soon as the elderly man finished speaking, his body immediately turned into specks of broken shadows that drifted away. He did not give Ning Fan any chance to refuse at all. Before Ning Fan could digest the huge amount of information in the elderly man's words, a shocking change had already occurred in heaven and earth. The copper boxes disappeared in the blink of an eye. The heaven stairway disappeared. The altar disappeared. Everything in the sky disappeared. Instead, a dark red ancient mountain slowly appeared in the sky. The moment the mountain appeared, a massive will that was enough to crush all ancient immortal venerables suddenly descended on Ning Fan's body. The fourth barbarian god frowned and let out a faint sigh. She could not help but admit that Ning Fan was very outstanding. How could a person who could obtain the identity of the successor of the Dao barbarian lineage not be outstanding? However, no matter how outstanding he is, he would probably stop at the fourth level. The first trial of the Dao barbarian lineage was called the Trial of Will. Only those who could endure 17 breaths under the will of the first barbarian god would pass the trial. The cultivation base of the first barbarian god was too high. Those who could endure 17 breaths under his will would at least be peak immortal emperors. 17 breaths. This kid won't be able to endure it. His strength is close to the ancient immortal venerables, but he is not a true immortal venerables. I'm afraid the fourth breath is his limit. The fourth barbarian god thought to himself. The first breath. Under the suppression of that massive will, Ning Fan felt as if he had suffered a heavy blow. He took 3 steps back and stabilized his body on the 4th step. A trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. His eyes were filled with faint flames of anger. He did not care about the first trial or not. He did not like the feeling of being suppressed by someone else's will. His will had already experienced millions of years of tempering in the 3 illusions of truth. He was not afraid of anyone's will, even if the other party was Man Shan of the first barbarian god Dao. The second breath. In the sky, other than the dark red mountain, there was also a dark red sea. Under the appearance of the mountain and the sea, the will that descended on Ning Fan's body immediately became several times stronger. An invisible force pushed Ning Fan back continuously. Every time he took a step back, he would definitely cough out a mouthful of blood. When the third breath arrived, the sky had already transformed into a mountain and 2 seas. On the 4th breath, another mountain appeared in the sky. The power of the will of the barbarian Dao mountain had already exceeded the endurance of any ancient immortal venerables. Under the suppression of this will, Ning Fan's injuries became more and more severe. His consciousness began to blur. Finally, on the 5th breath, he could not bear it anymore. With a loud bang, his body exploded and he died. Being able to endure until the 5th breath is already beyond my expectations. Unfortunately, you still died in the end. It seems like my previous worries were unnecessary. Even if you choose the shield of inheritance, you still don't have the right to inherit the sacred object of my Dao barbarian lineage, the god-exterminating shield of the ancient country. The 4th barbarian god let out a faint sigh. He actually felt a hint of pity. Ning Fan was indeed very outstanding. Being able to go through the 8th trial meant that he was definitely a rare talent in the future. If he wasn't the Taitsang tribulation spirit, it would also be a good thing for him to inherit the sacred object of the Dao barbarian lineage. If he wasn't the Taitsang tribulation spirit, I would help him pass the 3 trials of the Dao barbarian lineage and obtain the sacred object's acknowledgement. Unfortunately, his identity can't be changed. I also won't help the cultivators of the enemy race. Since the fall of the first barbarian god, there were only 4 inheritors. Even with the help of the later barbarian gods, the first 3 could not make it to the 3rd trial. This young man is the 4th. What a pity. The 4th barbarian god thought that Ning Fan had already exploded and died. At this moment, the eyeball monster in the outside world seemed to have sensed something as well. It actually woke up from the enchantment. He's dead. That brat died in the 8th trial. This time, things have really gone too far. Without him, how am I going to kill Inemo? It's all my fault. If I didn't force him to go through the 8th trial because I wanted to look at the beauty, he wouldn't have died. If I didn't lose myself in the beauty and was unable to extricate myself, I wouldn't have been in time to save him. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Big brother immortal, I've let you down. I can't help you take revenge. The eyeball monster's heart was filled with regret. He really wanted to slap himself a few times. Unfortunately, he did not have hands. Ning Fan was his greatest trump card to kill Mo. How could he die? How could he die? The eyeball monster thought that Ning Fan was already dead. The 4th barbarian god also thought that Ning Fan was already dead. Only Ning Fan knew that he was not dead at all. When he was about to die, he activated the power of the life illusion pill without any hesitation. The 6th breath. In the empty 4th level of the ancient barbarian tomb where Ning Fan's body exploded, a seemingly illusory flame suddenly appeared. The flame burned brighter and brighter. Gradually, it reached the height of a human. At the next moment, Ning Fan, who was dressed in white robes, walked out of the flame unscathed. He did not die. Not only did he not die, but he even lasted until the 6th breath. How is this possible? This young man is actually still alive? Be it the 4th barbarian god or the eyeball monster, all of them wore a shocked expression at this moment. They could not understand why Ning Fan, who had clearly died from his body exploding, could rise from the ashes and appear again. With their vast experience, they thought of several possibilities in just an instant. However, they could not verify it with Ning Fan. It was not that there were no methods to save one's life after death. However, all of them were things that even immortal emperors would find hard to obtain. This young man actually has such a method to protect himself. We have underestimated him, luckily. This brat is still alive. Ha! It's good that he's alive. It's good that he's alive. The eyeball monster was naturally overjoyed. The 4th barbarian god, on the other hand, knitted her brows. She sighed with mixed feelings again. She also felt that it was a pity that she did not manage to kill Ning Fan. At this moment, there were still 2 illusory flames burning in Ning Fan's dantian. After activating the medicinal power of the life illusion pill, 3 illusory flames would be born in his body. It could save his life for 3 times. However, he had just used one of them. Man Shan of the 1st barbarian god Dao is really a terrifying expert. If it wasn't for the life illusion pill, I would have definitely died in the 5th breath. There are still 2 illusory flames left. Within 2 hours, I still have 2 chances to come back to life. The eyeball monster seems to have regained his consciousness. If things don't work out, I can leave this place at any time and give up on the 8th trial. In this way, I don't have to worry about my future. Since I've already used up the life illusion pill, I shouldn't waste it. Let's just get through the 1st trial of the Dao Barbarian. The 7th breath, the 8th breath, the 9th breath and the 10th breath. 5 mountains and 5 seas had already appeared in the sky. The willpower that they emitted was enough to severely injure any immortal king expert. Since the 6th breath of revival, Ning Fan's body was once again suppressed by the willpower and injuries kept appearing on his body. At the 10th breath, he was already close to the end of his lifespan. At the 11th breath, Ning Fan could no longer bear the burden and his body exploded. However, at the 12th breath, he walked out of the illusory flames and was reborn from the ashes. In just 12 breaths, he had died twice. Without the life illusion pill, he certainly would not be able to get through the 1st trial of the Dao Barbarian with his current cultivation base. I still have one last chance to be reborn. Ning Fan's eyes glowed with green light as he looked at the 6 mountains and 6 seas that were gradually appearing in the sky. With every breath, a mountain or a sea would appear in the sky. The barbarians had 9 mountains and 8 seas as their limit. In other words, the 1st trial of the Dao Barbarian would at most last until the 17th breath. He still had one last chance to be reborn, which was enough to get through the 1st trial of the Dao Barbarian. If he can get through the first trial of the Dao Barbarian, he would be able to exchange the heaven-battling shield of the ancient country for one of the relics of the first barbarian god, Dao Man Shan. Ning Fan's eyes flickered. The life illusion pill was a supreme treasure. Since he had used it, he had to get it back. Dao Man Shan was a saint, and he was not an ordinary saint. He had 3 saint rings. All of his relics were definitely good stuff. Any one of them was enough to compensate for the loss of the life illusion pill. The 13th breath. The 14th breath. The 15th breath. Ning Fan finally could no longer bear the burden, and his body exploded and he died. At the 16th breath, he was reborn from the ashes. At this moment, the sky had already transformed into 8 mountains and 8 seas. The willpower of heaven and earth had already exceeded the endurance of an immortal emperor realm expert. Just as he was reborn from the ashes, Ning Fan bled from his 7 orifices again under the suppression of this level of willpower. The 3 chances of being reborn from the life illusion pill had already been used up. Next, he could only rely on his own strength to endure through the 17th breath. If he could endure it, he would be able to choose one of the relics of the saint and keep it for himself. If he could not endure it, he would have to give up on the 8th trial. Brat, I don't know what you are going through right now. If you need it, you just need to send a message and I will activate the heaven-deceiving formation for you to save your life. The voice of the strange eyeball resounded in Ning Fan's mind. Ning Fan did not give a reply. He just gritted his teeth and held on stubbornly under the willpower of heaven and earth. Just 1 breath more. Just the last breath more. There is no reason to use the life illusion pill in vain. I must take one of the relics of the saint. The 17th breath. At this moment, the 9 mountains and 8 seas in the sky all appeared. A pair of illusory eyes appeared in the sky and looked down at Ning Fan. Those were the eyes of Dao Man Shan. They looked at Ning Fan without any emotions. At this moment, the willpower of heaven and earth had reached its peak. Even an ordinary saint would be injured under this level of willpower. Ning Fan's eyes were filled with a hint of madness. The scenes of him transforming into a barbaric bull, a barbaric fish and a barbaric butterfly appeared in his mind. His willpower had already been tempered thousands of times. He could be defeated or killed, but his willpower could not be destroyed by anyone. The red light in his eyes became brighter and brighter. The bloodlines of the 4 clans were circulating in his body at the same time. The shadow of a long river appeared under his feet. There was a bridge on the river. It was his true bridge of Dao execution. At this moment, Ning Fan had already used all of his strength. No matter what, he had to endure through the 17th breath. It was clearly the last breath, but it gave Ning Fan the feeling that it was as long as a cycle of reincarnation. The 18th breath. The illusory shadows of the 9 mountains and 8 seas disappeared. The heavenly stairway, the sacrificial altar and the copper chest appeared again. On the sacrificial altar, the shadow of Dao Man Shan's mountains and seas also appeared. For the first time, his expressionless face showed a satisfied expression. You. Very good. With my order, I, Dao Man Shan, allow you to take away one of the treasures I left behind. This was a gift from a saint. He actually passed the first stage of the Dao barbarian race with a cultivation base that is not even at the immortal venerate realm. The 4th barbarian god gritted her teeth. Once one passes the first stage of the Dao barbarian race, he would have the right to take away one of the treasures left behind by Dao Man Shan. Will this young man choose the sacred treasure of the Dao barbarian race? Please don't. She would rather die thousands of times than to see the sacred treasure of her race fall into the hands of the Tai Tsung Jialing. While the 4th barbarian god was struggling in her heart, Ning Fan kept inhaling cold breaths. He felt dizzy. The copper chests in the sky opened on their own, revealing the supreme treasures inside. The shadow of Dao Man Shan's mountains and seas introduced them to Ning Fan one by one. As for Ning Fan, he had already climbed up the sacrificial altar and listened to Dao Man Shan's introduction. When I pacified the 10 countries and established the ancient barbarian world, I once obtained the eye of a quasi-saint of the 10 countries and refined it into a treasure called the heaven-sweeping pearl. Even though this pearl is only at the innate grade, if the blood of a saint is used as a sacrifice, the power of this pearl will increase by 10 times. It can even slightly injure a saint. It's actually a magic treasure that can even injure a saint. Doesn't this mean that this treasure is invincible against anyone below the saint realm? When I was traveling around the immortal regions, I once obtained a heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma. It's useless for those above the saint realm to consume it. However, those below the saint realm can directly attain the cultivation base of a quasi-saint if they don't die after consuming it. It was actually a spiritual herb that could directly allow one to attain the cultivation base of a quasi-saint. This nameless ancient scroll was written by an immemorial immortal sovereign. I don't know the words in it, but it seems to be a record of some mysterious divine ability. It turned out to be a secret scroll of divine ability left behind by an immemorial immortal sovereign. I obtained this puppet by chance when I was traveling around the desolate regions. This puppet is almost at the 8th tribulation immortal emperor realm. It's not that powerful, but it can still be used to guard the cave abode. It turned out to be an immortal emperor realm puppet with the cultivation base of the 8th tribulation immortal emperor. Even though Ning Fan had gotten used to seeing good items, he still felt like his horizons had been broadened at this moment. Compared to the items left behind by Dao Man Shan, the heavenly treasures he had seen in his life were not worth mentioning at all. Any one of the items here was enough to cause the old monsters of the 4 heavens realms to go crazy over them. The better these items were, the more Ning Fan did not know how to choose. What should I choose? Inadvertently, Ning Fan's gaze fell upon a copper box. Inside the copper box, there was a fragment of a magic treasure lying all alone. It seemed to be a broken piece of some shield treasure. Its color was dark red and it looked like copper but not copper. Its spiritual light was dim and it was very inconspicuous. Ning Fan could not tell what kind of power it possessed. What is this? Ning Fan pointed at the broken piece of magic treasure and asked. I don't intend to tell you what this item is. If you like it, you can take it away directly. However, you can't take the other items. Dao Man Shan answered with a meaningful tone. Before Ning Fan, there were 3 other inheritors who came to Dao Man Shan. However, none of them chose this item. Will this young man choose this item? Dao Man Shan shook his head slightly. No matter what Ning Fan chooses, he would not care about it. After all, he was already a dead man. All the responsibilities he had when he was alive had been fulfilled. The karma after his death had nothing to do with him. Chapter 938. What should he choose? Ning Fan's eyes lingered on each of the bronze chests. It was difficult for him to make a decision. As for Dao Man Shan, after introducing all the items, he stood quietly at one side with his eyes closed, not interfering with Ning Fan's choice. There were a total of 400 bronze chests and 400 items. Among them, there were 74 magic treasures. All of them were innate grade. There were 166 pills and spiritual medicines. All of them were 9 Revolution Emperor pills and innate spiritual medicines. There were also many jade slips and scrolls containing cultivation methods and abilities. Any one of them could become the trump card of an immortal Emperor realm expert. There were also more than 10 spiritual puppets. Among them, the one with the highest grade was the 8th Tribulation Immortal Emperor Realm spiritual puppet. It would probably be difficult to find such a high-grade spiritual puppet within 4 days. Other than that, there were also many miscellaneous items such as the treasure map of a secret place of a sacred sect, the war chariot of a sage when he was still alive and the wine bottles that he used. What made Ning Fan especially speechless was that there was a duty used by a female sage among the miscellaneous items. It was not because Dao Man Shan was lecherous that he collected this item. In fact, even this inconspicuous Duda was an innate magic treasure called the 42 Worlds Chaotic Heavenly Silk. What Ning Fan was sure of was that any one of the sage's items here was a rare treasure. Of course, there was also the inconspicuous shield treasure fragment among the miscellaneous items. However, Ning Fan could not determine the value of this fragment. Dao Man Shan did not introduce the fragment in detail. On the surface, it looked ordinary. However, if one stares at it for a long time, one's ears would start buzzing. If one continued to stare at it, the sound would gradually become clearer. It was an ancient roar. It sounded like a human but not a human, like a beast but not a beast. It gave one a chilling feeling. Although there were many powerful magic treasures in this place, only the fragment of the shield treasure could give Ning Fan the chills. That feeling of fear was somewhat similar to the heaven-warring shield of the ancient country, but it was hundreds of times scarier. What exactly is the secret of this fragment? I can't see through it. After a long time, Ning Fan withdrew his gaze from the fragment of the shield treasure and began to ponder. He could only take one of the sage's items here. Therefore, he had to be cautious in his choice. It would be best if he chose the most practical item. This shield fragment might be extraordinary, but it might not be practical. It wasn't a complete treasure and didn't have any defensive capabilities. What could he do with it? Speaking of which, the material of this fragment was quite extraordinary. It was a spirit ore that Ning Fan had never seen before. If he melted this fragment and added some other materials into it, he should be able to refine an extremely good shield. However, this was unnecessary. Ning Fan did not have the confidence to refine a Xiantian magical treasure with this small fragment. Was it that easy to refine a Xiantian magical treasure? He might be able to refine a shield, but its grade would most likely not be high. In that case, it would be better to just choose a Xiantian level defensive magic treasure. Why would he need to forge his own shield? In that case, what was the point of choosing this shield treasure fragment? Shaking his head, Ning Fan shifted his gaze away to look at other things. Although Dao Man Shan did not open his eyes, he knew everything that happened here like the back of his hand. This boy doesn't intend to choose this item. Dao Man Shan sighed in his heart but did not say anything. No matter what choice Ning Fan made, he would not interfere. However, he had been waiting for many years for the inheritor. Thus, he felt a little regretful. What a pity. This boy is the fourth person who has the chance to obtain the Dao Barbarian's approval. Is he going to miss the chance to obtain the Dao Barbarian's sacred relic as well? Just like the previous three inheritors, he did not have the courage to choose the sacred relic fragment. The fourth barbarian god was originally very nervous. However, after realizing that Ning Fan did not pay too much attention to the sacred relic fragment, he immediately felt relieved. It seems like this boy doesn't really care about the sacred relic fragment. I've been worrying too much. The sacred relic of my Dao barbarian lineage won't fall into his hands. That's good. Ning Fan's eyes wandered through the many relics in this place. In the end, there were only 4 items that he desired to obtain. Among all the magic treasures, the one he wanted the most was not the most powerful one, the heaven-sweeping pearl, but the undergarment of the female saintess, the 42 worlds red heavenly silk. The reason why he chose this item was definitely not because he had a special hobby. Instead, it was because this treasure had a special use. This red heavenly silk was an innate grade magic treasure. Its defensive power was extremely strong. In terms of power alone, it was not the strongest among all the innate grade magic treasures in this place. However, according to Dao Man Shan's introduction, this treasure could protect the host's mind and spirit during the immeasurable tribulation. It could increase the host's chance of becoming a Sage Realm expert by around 30%. According to Dao Man Shan, the immeasurable tribulation was a great tribulation that one must go through to become a Sage Realm expert. It was extremely dangerous and it was extremely rare for it to appear. Only by attracting the immeasurable tribulation would a quasi-saint have the chance to attain the 3rd step. However, during the ancient times, only 1 or 2 quasi-saints could cultivate to the perfection realm and attract the immeasurable tribulation among 1,000 quasi-saints. Among those who successfully attracted the immeasurable tribulation, only 10% of them could pass the tribulation successfully. 90% of the quasi-saints would die during the immeasurable tribulation. It was enough to show how dangerous this tribulation was. Putting aside the innate grade of the red heavenly silk, the 30% chance of passing the immeasurable tribulation alone was enough to make Ning Fan's heart move. If he chooses the red heavenly silk, it would certainly be much easier for him to attain the sage realm in the future. Besides, this red heavenly silk itself was an extremely good innate grade magic treasure. Its defensive power was especially extraordinary. Since it could be used as a dudu by a female sage and be worn close to her body, how could its defensive power be low? Defense was just too important. Ning Fan had countless offensive methods, but he did not have many defensive methods. The defensive ability of the three flowers converging prominence was already not enough for him to use for a long time. The physical defense of his ancient devil body was also not enough for him to use in battles above the void-shedding realm. The 7-star lamp, a 12th Nirvana grade defensive magic treasure that he obtained with great difficulty, was detonated by Ning Fan. The life illusion pill that he used to save his life was also used up. Currently, Ning Fan urgently needed to increase his defensive methods to protect himself. This red heavenly silk of the 42 worlds was indeed a good choice. If he has the red heavenly silk to protect himself, he was confident that he could withstand the attacks of an immortal venerables head-on without dying. Even if he faces the attacks of immortal kings or immortal emperors, he would still have a certain level of strength to protect himself. Compared to this item, the Heaven Rippling Pearl was much inferior. Among the many magic treasures here, the Heaven Rippling Pearl was undoubtedly the strongest. How could a magic treasure that could injure a sage realm not be strong? This treasure was absolutely invincible against anyone below the sage realm. It could even kill an immortal emperor realm cultivator like a dog. But there was a prerequisite. In order to unleash the strongest power of this pearl, he must use the blood of a saint to refine it. This was a little troublesome. Ning Fan knew that he could not get his hands on the blood of a saint. Where should he get it from? In this world, is there still a saint? Is there still a saint's blood left behind? Without the blood of a saint, this bead would only be able to unleash a tenth of its true might at most. It would only be slightly stronger than other Khanate treasures, so it wouldn't be too heaven-defying. With Ning Fan's current cultivation base and the heaven-sweeping pearl in his hand, he could at most fight against a high-level immortal venerable who was 1 or 2 levels higher than him. This was obviously of little value. How could an offensive magical treasure that couldn't kill the enemy in a single strike be more practical than a defensive magical treasure that could protect one's life? Other than the red heavenly sash, he was also very interested in the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma. In the end, magic treasures were just external objects. It was far less practical than directly raising one's cultivation. If it was not for the fact that it could increase the chances of becoming a sage, the red armillary sash was definitely not as practical as the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma. If one did not die after consuming this Ganoderma, they would have the cultivation of a demisage. If he has the cultivation base of a quasi-saint realm expert, why would he need to choose an innate magic treasure? Cultivation was fundamental. A Dujin cultivator with a primordial magic treasure would never be able to defeat an empty-handed quasi-sage. Should I choose this heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma? It would be a lie to say that he was not tempted. However, Ning Fan did not choose the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma immediately. His expression was extremely cautious. This item could allow one to attain the cultivation base of a quasi-saint immediately. It was just too heaven-defying. However, the heavenly Tao was a cycle. Things would always move in the opposite direction when they reach an extreme. There are gains and losses. The more heaven-defying an item was, the more flaws it would have. For example, the immortal body of the undying great emperor could not even kill a desolate saint. However, it was very difficult for him to become a saint. After consuming the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma, one could directly attain the cultivation base of a quasi-saint. However, there was a precondition: one must not die after consuming it. If a mortal did not explode and die after consuming an immortal pill, he would also have the chance to become an immortal in a single step. However, in this world, there were not many cultivators who could become an immortal in a single step. Almost all those who tried to become an immortal in a single step had died. Ning Fan's eyes glowed with green light. The more he looked at it, the deeper his frown became. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze and sighed softly. When he looked at the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma again, his eyes were much colder than before. As expected, this heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma has a huge flaw. The medicinal power of this heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma was extremely domineering. However, due to the restriction of the rules, it could not be consumed separately. It had to be consumed whole. Otherwise, its medicinal power would be greatly reduced. If 10,000 people consume the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma, I'm afraid there would be 9,999 of them who could not endure the medicinal power and would directly explode and die. In order to endure the medicinal power without dying, one must at least have the physical body of a sage realm expert. Isn't this a joke? Since ancient times, how many people in the second step possessed the physical body of a third step cultivator? How many second step cultivators are qualified to consume the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma without dying? This is another item that is very useless. When Ning Fan cultivates his physical body to the third step, he would be able to fight against a sage realm expert with just his physical body. At that time, would he still care about the magic power of a quasi-sage realm expert? At that time, would it be necessary for him to consume the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma? If he chooses the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma, he would certainly not be foolish enough to wait until his physical body reaches the third step before consuming it. He would divide the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma into tens of parts and consume them bit by bit. In this way, the medicinal power of the spirit Ganoderma would be less than 10%. It would not be enough for him to break through to the quasi-sage realm. It might not even be enough for him to advance from the crossing truth realm to the shedding void realm. This item could improve Ning Fan's cultivation base. However, the degree of improvement would not be too heaven-defying. Heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma. Ning Fan stared at the heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma for a long time. Eventually, he moved his eyes away and looked at the 8th tribulation spiritual puppet. This item also made his heart beat faster. If he chooses this spiritual puppet, he would immediately have an immortal Emperor realm fighter who is loyal to him. To barbarian Dao Shan who had a high standard, the 8th tribulation spiritual puppet could at most be used to guard his abode. However, Ning Fan was different. The place he lived in was the 4 heavens and 9 worlds. It was a world where a quasi-sage realm expert and an immortal Emperor realm expert could do whatever they want. On the surface, there were only 16 immortal emperors in the entire Eastern Heaven immortal world. A few of them died in the Sun Luo War. Among them, there were only a few who had attained the 8th tribulation spiritual puppet. The cultivation base of an eternal 8th tribulation spiritual puppet could definitely be considered as the top combat power in the 4 heavens immortal world. If he chooses this spiritual puppet, there would be very few people who could kill him within 4 days. This spiritual puppet tempted Ning Fan. However, it also had a huge flaw. The flaw was that this spiritual puppet was just too old and outdated. In short, the durability of this spiritual puppet was already running low. It could be used a few more times at most and then it would completely break down. It was practical but not durable. The 4th item that tempted Ning Fan was a scroll with a blood lotus drawn on it. A red-robed child was sitting on top of the blood lotus. He was performing hand seals with both of his hands. His appearance was vivid and lifelike as if he could walk out from the painting. If one takes a closer look, the red-robed child in the painting looks somewhat similar to barbarian Dao Shan. This scroll contains the strongest cultivation method in my life, blood lotus scripture. This is a body refinement cultivation method. It was passed down from an ancient immortal sovereign who had attained the Tao through his own body. Unfortunately, what I obtained is just an incomplete scroll. This cultivation method can be cultivated by immortal venerables. It can temper one's physical body step by step. If one can cultivate all the cultivation realms recorded in the incomplete scroll, one can even attain the 3rd step when they are at the 2nd step. Ning Fan did not lack high-grade cultivation methods. However, it was his first time encountering a body refinement cultivation method that could allow one to attain the 3rd step. Immortal Sovereign was a unique title for 4th step cultivators. This was a cultivation method that was left behind by a fourth-step body refinement cultivator. It was definitely more profound than the yin-yang transformation and chaotic loop art. Unfortunately, it was just an incomplete scroll. Moreover, things like cultivation methods would not be put to use immediately. One would need to spend a lot of time to cultivate it in order to display its benefits. It was practical, but it could not be put to use immediately. Moreover, it would take an unknown number of years to attain the third-step body with this cultivation method: red heavenly silk, heaven-opening spirit Ganoderma, eighth tribulation puppet, blood lotus scripture. Which one should I choose? While Ning Fan was pondering, his eyes suddenly turned cold. He had sensed something. At this moment, there was an unusual change in the lake outside. The lake water that was as dark as ink began to boil. Scorching hot bubbles rose and evaporated. No. To be more precise, it was not the lake water that was boiling. It was the blood that was dissolved in the lake water. That was the black blood that flowed from the undying Great Emperor's fourth devil star after it was destroyed. The previously deathly still black blood seemed to have sensed something at this moment, and there was an excited emotion. At the lakeside, the strange eyeball looked at the boiling lake water in confusion. He could not understand why the lake water would have such an unusual change. Strange. Why is the undying demon blood in the outside world suddenly boiling? This fragment. Ning Fan's eyes suddenly flashed and he looked at the fragment of the shield treasure. Not only the undying demon blood had an unusual change, but the fragment of the shield treasure also had an unusual change. The dark red fragment was giving off a blazing red light as if it had been calcined by a blazing flame. Moreover, there was an aura that was extremely similar to the undying Tao law that was constantly spreading from the fragment. No. It was not similar. The power that the fragment contained was obviously the undying power, which was the same as the undying Great Emperor's power. This fragment, before Ning Fan could continue looking at it, the fragment of the shield treasure suddenly flew out on its own. It turned into a ray of blazing red light and flew towards Ning Fan. When it was 3 zhang away from Ning Fan, the fragment suddenly slowed down and landed on Ning Fan's palm obediently. What's going on? I haven't chosen the relic of the saint yet. Why did this fragment fly towards me on its own? The moment the fragment flew into Ning Fan's hand, be it the heaven-battling shield of the ancient country or the other bronze boxes, all of them disappeared. Depressing. Does this mean that I can only choose this fragment of the shield treasure and cannot choose anything else? Has the choice already ended? I haven't even started. Ning Fan's forehead was filled with black lines. Isn't this too much of a scam? Can I choose again? Ning Fan shifted his gaze towards Dao Man Shan and realized that the latter's expression was one of shock that he had never seen before. A dignified heaven-opening artifact actually took the initiative to recognize him as its master. Dao Man Shan was greatly astonished. After a long while, he finally saw some clues and thought to himself. I see. This young man has a trace of the fourth fragment. No wonder. The fourth barbarian god was even more astonished. She could not figure out what was going on. She really could not understand it. Ning Fan obviously had no intention of choosing the fragment of the holy artifact. Why did the fragment fly towards Ning Fan on its own and fly into his hands? How could there be such a thing as a pie falling from the sky? That was the fragment of a heaven-opening artifact. Moreover, it was not an ordinary heaven-opening artifact. It was a supreme treasure that was ranked 19th among all the magic treasures in the world since the beginning of time. Even if this treasure was just a fragment, it should have its own pride. Even a saint would not be able to subdue this fragment without tens of thousands of years of refinement. However, such a supreme treasure that was so difficult to subdue had voluntarily given itself to Ning Fan during the first encounter. Can someone explain to me what is going on? Rumble, between heaven and earth, black lightning began to appear unceasingly. Countless rays of light flew out from the fragment of the shield treasure in Ning Fan's hand, forming an incomparably huge shadow of a shield in the sky. Bit by bit, it appeared between heaven and earth. The shadow of the shield was immeasurably tall. Its height seemed to have exceeded the limits of heaven and earth. Its material seemed to be copper but not copper. It was dark red in color and there were densely packed undying Tao laws intertwining on it. There were countless shadows of giants floating on the surface of the shield. Upon closer inspection, each of the giants held a shield in their left hand and a sword in their right hand. Their bodies were clad in dark red armor. The strange thing was that each of the giants was illusory and there seemed to be cultivators inside their bodies. At the moment when the shadow of the giant shield appeared, all the innate magic treasures in the area trembled as if they were afraid of it. All of them extinguished their light and lost their luster. Innate magic treasures were actually afraid of it. I am the sixth fragment of the heaven-opening artifact of the chaotic Kun's sacred sect, the breath of the fourth fragment. Remembrance, there was no sound coming from it but Ning Fan seemed to have heard those voices from the gigantic shadow of the shield. It also felt like those voices were coming from the fragment in his hand. He didn't understand what the voice was saying. It was intermittent and he couldn't really understand it. The only thing he could feel was the aura of a magic treasure on the shadow of the shield which was beyond his understanding. In front of the shadow of the shield, he actually had an unprecedented feeling of insignificance. It was as if this ancient shadow of the shield was heaven and earth, the great Tao and all the rules of heaven and earth. It was as if there was nothing that could restrain this shield and there was no force that could break its defense. Even if the heavens fell and the earth split apart, time would not be able to destroy this shield. What is this shield? Ning Fan stared at the shadow of the giant shield in the sky. For some reason, he suddenly thought of the ancient bell of Samsara above the sea of clouds when he was at the mortal severing realm. The bell of Samsara was a magic treasure that surpassed the power of the cultivators of the four heavens. No cultivator of the four heavens could subdue it. That magic treasure had already surpassed the innate realm. The shadow of the giant shield in front of him actually gave off a feeling that was extremely similar to the bell of Samsara. It was as if they were magic treasures of the same level, the sixth fragment of the heaven-opening artifact. Could this be the origin of the fragment of the shield treasure? Ning Fan did not know what the heaven-opening artifact was but he guessed that it was a magic treasure that was at a higher level than innate magic treasures. This fragment seemed to be even more extraordinary than what he had imagined. Perhaps it was not a bad choice to choose this fragment, the fourth fragment. Reminiscing. Meeting, with me, at this moment, another change took place. The undying devil blood in the lake outside suddenly began to rush into Ning Fan's body. On the surface, it looked as if Ning Fan was absorbing that power. Hiss. What's going on? This young man doesn't possess the undying devil body but he could actually absorb the undying power in the undying great emperor's blood. The eyeball was shocked. This drop of blood contained a trace of the undying great emperor's inheritance. Only those who possess the undying physique could obtain this inheritance. How could Ning Fan obtain it? The eyeball was not the only one who was shocked. Even Ning Fan himself was shocked. Even though his consciousness was trapped in the ancient barbarian tomb, he could still sense the changes in the outside world. He could clearly feel the power of the undying great emperor's devil blood flowing into his body at a crazy rate. I miss home, very much, but my home is no longer here. This time, it was the undying great emperor's voice that resounded beside Ning Fan's ears. My first home is the Black Mountain tribe in the ancient barbarian world. However, the Black Mountain tribe was destroyed by the Z-Wei immortal cultivator. I lost my first home, my second home is the Z-Do immortal domain. However, it was destroyed by the tribulation spirit's invasion, perhaps. I still have a home. Before I was born, it was once the fourth fragment of the god-exterminating shield of the ancient country. Due to an accident, it escaped from the ancient barbarian tomb and was reincarnated as a human. The undying power doesn't come from nowhere. It's the power that the god-exterminating shield of the ancient country deduced itself. The intermittent voice resounded beside Ning Fan's ears. The information was too fragmented and Ning Fan could not understand it clearly. However, he still vaguely heard some keywords such as the fourth fragment. The fragment of the shield flew into his hand on its own. At the same time, the undying devil blood in the outside world also changed. There seems to be some kind of connection between the undying Great Emperor and this fragment, the sixth fragment, the fourth fragment. The God-exterminating shield of the ancient country, you have the sixth fragment. With the power of the sixth fragment, it's enough to give birth to the undying power. The undying power can't come from nowhere. Only the God-exterminating shield of the ancient country can create it. This Devil Star is my fourth Devil Star. It contains a trace of the chi of the fourth fragment, impart to you, the Tao of Undying. With the Tao of Undying, you can control the fragment. Pain. Ning Fan felt a sharp pain and a stream of black blood flowed out from his right eye. There was also a faint purple star that was faintly discernible in his right eye. That was the power that belonged to the fourth Devil Star in the right eye of the undying Great Emperor. However, it had now gone into Ning Fan's right eye. That power was too massive and it seemed to clash with Ning Fan's yin-yang devil veins. It was very difficult for Ning Fan to absorb it. However, it still managed to enter his body. After the appearance of this faint purple star, Ning Fan could clearly feel that there was a mysterious connection between him and the fragment of the shield treasure in his hand. It was a very mysterious connection. It was as if the shield treasure fragment in front of him was a part of his body. At the same time, it also felt like he was a part of that fragment. This is not a useless fragment. With this connection, Ning Fan could feel an immense power from the fragment. The faint purple star rotated in Ning Fan's right eye. The power of the shield treasure fragment in his hand was gradually stimulated by Ning Fan. The power of the fragment is still there and I can still use it. Since I was forced to choose this fragment, I might as well see how powerful it is. Ning Fan did not say a word. His mind sank into the fragment as if he was communicating with it. After a long time, the shadow of the giant shield disappeared. After a long time, the faint purple star in Ning Fan's right eye stopped rotating and disappeared as if it had never appeared before. However, the shield treasure fragment in Ning Fan's hand became redder and the light it gave off became stronger. It was like a precious pearl that had been covered in dust for many years was being polished at this moment. The light became brighter and brighter. In the end, it became as dazzling as the sun. No one could look at it directly. As for Ning Fan, the light in his eyes became brighter. He realized that this fragment was much stronger than he had imagined. This item is the fragment of a heaven creation magical treasure. That heaven creation magical treasure seems to be called the ancient country god exterminating shield. Even though there is only a fragment of this shield, the power contained within it still surpasses any innate magical treasure. This power can still be used. The way to use it seems like I have to protect it in my dantian. Ning Fan wiped away the black blood that flowed out from his right eye. Suddenly, he raised his hand and the shield treasure fragment turned into a ray of light and swallowed it. After communicating with the fragment for a long time, Ning Fan had already found the way to use it. The fragment of the god exterminating shield flew into Ning Fan's dantian and hovered around his primordial spirit to protect it. As Ning Fan willed it, the magic power in his body immediately flowed towards the fragment of the god exterminating shield. At this moment, the power of the fragment of the god exterminating shield was completely activated by Ning Fan. At this moment, layers of dark red light appeared on Ning Fan's body. The light became more and more condensed. Eventually, it turned into the shadow of a giant that seemed illusory and wrapped his body within it. The shadow of the giant was only 100 zhang tall. It was wearing a dark red armor that emitted a threatening divine light. Its body was like burning flames. It held a shield in its left hand and a sword in its right hand. The sword was extremely illusory as if it could not be used. However, the shield seemed a little solid. Inside the giant's body, Ning Fan seemed to have the strongest defensive power in the world. At this moment, he had such a feeling. It was as if there was no attack that could penetrate the shadow of the giant and hurt him who was inside the giant's body. Even the attacks of some immortal emperors could not do it. Do you want to test the defensive power of the god exterminating shield of the ancient country? Dao Man Shan, who was not concerned about Ning Fan's choice, suddenly spoke with a smile. He did not give Ning Fan the chance to answer. Before Ning Fan could reply, he had already raised his hand and pressed a finger down on Ning Fan. Dao Man Shan's finger was indescribably profound. As his finger swept across the sky immediately turned into a starry sky. Within the starry sky, 9 cultivation planets crashed towards Ning Fan. Each of the cultivation planets was an emperor-grade cultivation planet. Once they explode, even an immortal emperor would be injured. The self-destruction of an emperor-grade cultivation planet was enough to slightly injure an immortal emperor who had undergone the 6th tribulation of all eternity. When dozens of emperor stars explode at the same time, perhaps even a peak immortal emperor would have to retreat. The power of Dao Man Shan's finger directly manifested 9 emperor-grade cultivation planets. The self-destruction of 9 emperor-grade cultivation planets should be comparable to a full-powered attack of an 8th tribulation immortal emperor. Dao Man Shan thought to himself. He could also display a stronger attack, but that would exceed the current defensive power of the God-exterminating shield. After all, Ning Fan only had a fragment of the God-exterminating shield. The defensive power of the God-exterminating shield was still very limited. Bang! As Dao Man Shan uttered the word, the 9 stars exploded at the same time. Ning Fan had seen the explosion of cultivation planets before, but it was his first time witnessing the explosion of an emperor-grade cultivation planet. It was not an exaggeration to say that the force of the explosion was enough to destroy heaven and earth. If it was him in the past, even if he had the strength comparable to an immortal venerate, he would certainly be severely injured by such an explosion or even die. It would be useless even if he hid in the profound Yin world. The explosive force of such a level was enough to penetrate through the medium-sized world and hurt the cultivators inside the world treasure. However, at this moment, Ning Fan activated the power of the fragment of the God-exterminating shield. With the giant's shadow protecting his body, he did not feel any sense of danger even when the 9 emperor stars exploded. The giant raised the shield in his hand. His expression was indifferent and emotionless, as if the explosion of the 9 stars was nothing. As soon as the divine light dispersed, the destructive explosive storm was blocked 10,000 zhang away from the giant. The area within 10,000 zhang was like a vacuum. No attack could penetrate it. Even the explosion of 9 emperor-grade cultivation planets could not break the defense of the giant's shadow, let alone injuring Ning Fan, who was inside the giant's body. This was the terrifying defensive power of the fragment of the God-exterminating shield. It was the God-exterminating shield of the ancient country, a heaven-opening grade magic treasure. Even if Ning Fan only had 1 fragment and his current strength was only comparable to an immortal venerate, he could withstand a full-powered attack from an 8th tribulation immortal emperor without suffering any damage. This fragment is the 6th fragment of the God-exterminating shield of the ancient country. On the ancient heaven-opening ranking, even the natal magic treasures of some immortal sovereigns might not be ranked in the top 100. However, this treasure is ranked 19th. When this treasure was intact, there were many immortal sovereigns who coveted this shield. However, none of them could defeat me and take it away. When I was at my peak, my cultivation base was at the desolate Saint Realm. My strength was much weaker than a 4th step immortal sovereign. However, I was not afraid of those immortal sovereigns because of the heaven-defying defensive power of this shield. Unfortunately, I was tricked by the immortal sovereign Huang Gu. This shield was also broken into 6 fragments during that battle. The 6 fragments were scattered all over the world. Among them, the 4th fragment had the highest spiritual power and it had reincarnated into a human. The 1st and 2nd fragments were taken away by the ancient Huang Gu. The 5th fragment was retrieved by the chaotic Kun sacred sect, but its whereabouts were unknown. As for the 3rd fragment, it was lost in the 6 paths of samsara and couldn't be found. The fragment in my hand is the 6th fragment. Because you could make this fragment recognize you as its master on its own, I am telling you so much. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said much. I am already dead, but I don't want this supreme treasure to be covered in dust. You are fated with this treasure. Since you can make it recognize you as its master on its own, don't let its reputation down. With this treasure protecting you, no one below the 9 tribulation immortal emperor can hurt you. Of course, if you can find the other fragments and fuse them with the sixth fragment, its defensive power will be even stronger. If you can gather all of the fragments, this treasure will become a true treasure that can open the heavens. Even a fourth step immortal emperor will go crazy for it. You are very lucky to have the chi of the fourth fragment and gain the recognition of the sixth fragment. Ning Fan's eyes widened in surprise. His heart was already filled with waves of shock. He did not expect that this god-vanquishing shield of the ancient country was actually a supreme treasure that even a fourth-step immortal emperor would covet. On the ancient heaven opening ranking, this treasure was ranked 19th. Just a single fragment was enough to ignore the attacks of immortal emperors below the Nine Tribulations realm. With this shield, Dao Man Shan was not afraid of fourth-step immortal emperors with his desolate saint realm cultivation base. If he chooses this item, he would immediately have a heaven-defying defensive power that would make him invulnerable to attacks below the Nine Tribulations realm. Moreover, if he is lucky enough to find the other fragments, he could even make the god-vanquishing shield's power grow stronger. What surprised Ning Fan even more was that after the fragment of the god-vanquishing shield entered his dantian, even the yin-yang locket was afraid of it. Moreover, traces of undying power flowed out from the fragment and continuously fused into Ning Fan's bloodline, changing his devil bloodline, causing his blood to gradually gain the undying characteristic. He was actually developing the undying physique bit by bit. His body was slowly producing the devil blood of the undying devil veins. Since ancient times, the undying Great Emperor was the first person to possess the undying physique while Si Ming was the second. Would he, Ning Fan, be the third? It was definitely not a loss to choose this treasure. Since you have already obtained the sixth fragment, you are the true inheritor of my Dao barbarian lineage. With my order, no one is allowed to attack you in the ancient barbarian tomb. I, Dao Barbarian Mountain, will personally protect you during your 8th and even 9th stages. Let's go. I will accompany you to the 7th level to meet Shi Zihua. I don't believe that a mere 4th barbarian god dares to disobey the order of me, the first barbarian god. However, before that, you still have to go through the 2nd and 3rd stages of the Dao Barbarian Tomb. I don't have the fragment anymore, but I still have other things that I can give you. You can choose from them. Dao Barbarian Mountain flicked his sleeves and the entire world changed. At the next moment, he brought Ning Fan to the 5th level of the ancient barbarian tomb. The 2nd stage of the Dao Barbarian Tomb begins. With the protection of the fragment of the god-vanquishing shield, it shouldn't be difficult for you to pass this stage. Dao Barbarian Mountain said confidently.